Hello and welcome to Hidden Dusk, a place where the night grows quiet and the shadows begin to tell their stories. Before we begin, dim the lights, get comfortable and relax. And if you enjoy calm and eerie stories like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, let the darkness guide you into tonight's story. When my mother, sister, autistic brother, and I moved into a house in Hazel Park, Michigan, it seemed fine at first. But as time passed, we started hearing strange noises. Noises none of us could explain. My family and I all mentioned hearing things, but we tried to brush them off as nothing unusual. The house had an attic, and it creeped me out from the start. I never dared go near it. It had one of those pull-down ladders, and something about it just felt wrong. One night, while my brother and sister were asleep, my mom and I were sitting on the couch, chatting casually. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, I heard the distinct sound of heavy boots walking down the hallway toward us. The house had wooden floors, so I was used to them creaking, but this sound was different, clear and deliberate. I tilted my head to look down the hallway. From where the couch was angled, I could see straight down it. But I didn't see anyone. I asked my mom if she'd heard it too. She nodded, her expression uneasy. The noise stopped, and we tried to continue our conversation, but we were both on edge. Then, about 5 minutes later, the same noise started again. This time, it sounded like the footsteps were getting closer. My fear spiked. I couldn't stay there any longer. I told my mom to grab my brother and sister because we needed to get out of the house immediately. We woke everyone up. My sister was confused and kept asking what was going on, but I just told her to get in the car and that we'd explain later. Once we were all in the car and driving around the neighborhood, we told her what had happened. She was skeptical but could tell we weren't making it up. We drove around for about 2 hours, too scared to go back. Eventually, we convinced ourselves it might have been a real person, maybe a homeless person hiding in the attic. That idea was terrifying, but somehow less frightening than the thought of something supernatural. So we finally decided to return home. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, though a deep sense of dread washed over me, my mom was the first to go inside. She looked around and came back out, saying she didn't see or hear anything unusual. We thought about calling the police in case someone really was in the attic, but since we hadn't actually seen anyone and couldn't prove anything, we hesitated. Summoning all the courage I had, I stepped inside the house. But the moment I did, a loud bang sounded directly above my head, from the attic. I froze, then screamed and bolted back to the car, locking the doors behind me. My mom came to the car and opened the door, trying to calm me down. When she saw how badly I was shaking, she decided we wouldn't stay in the house that night. Instead, we packed up and went to my grandma's house, where we spent the night. Looking back, I probably wouldn't have been so terrified if that had been the only incident. But it wasn't. That house had a dark energy, and other things had happened there that I couldn't explain. Once, while I was in a bedroom with a friend, I suddenly felt like I was being strangled. I couldn't breathe, and my friend screamed for my mom. When she rushed into the room, there was no one there. Yet, somehow I had a red handprint on my neck. I often feel a presence, and most of the time, I can ignore it. But in that house, the feeling was different. Stronger, darker, and undeniably evil. I don't think I'll ever forget how that place made me feel. That's one of my most real and terrifying experiences. I have more to share, but for now, this is one I'll always remember. 4 years ago, I lived in Hamtramck and became very close to my neighbors. It was a friendship that clicked instantly. When they decided to start a family, they bought a 1930s Roebuck brick house in Ferndale. It was a 2-flat home. My partner and I moved into the upper flat, while Nick, Sarah, and their 3-year-old son Enzo, our godson, lived in the lower flat. Initially, everything was fine, but about 9 months ago, things started to get strange. Up until that point, Nick and Sarah didn't believe in anything supernatural, but recent events have changed their minds. The first incident happened while Sarah was cooking dinner. She felt something fall on her head, slide off, and hit the floor. When she looked down, it was a magnet from the fridge. The strange part? The fridge was on the opposite side of the kitchen. The only other person home was Enzo, who was wrapped in a blanket and completely engrossed in his TV show. Another time, Sarah and Nick's sister were in the basement, which we all share as a winter smoking room. While they were talking, they heard distinct footsteps above them, walking across the living room floor. Yet no one else was home. What's creepiest are the voices. On multiple occasions, Nick or Sarah have heard what sounded like the other person calling out to them, only to realize they were alone. Nick once woke up to Sarah's voice calling his name, telling him it was time to wake up. He got out of bed and went to the kitchen, only to find no one there. Later, Sarah confirmed she hadn't said a word before leaving for work. Similarly, Sarah has been in the kitchen and heard Nick's voice talking to her, only to discover he hadn't even come home yet. Another time, while giving Enzo a bath, Sarah distinctly heard Nick and me having a conversation in the kitchen. Excited, she dried Enzo off and went to greet us, only to find the house completely empty. Both Nick and I were still at work. There have been physical occurrences as well. A couple of weeks ago, Nick, Enzo, and I went out for lunch. Before leaving, Nick picked up a hat that was on the dining room floor and placed it on the coat rack in the living room. When we returned, the hat was back on the dining room floor, exactly where it had been before. What's strange is that my partner Brad and I haven't experienced anything unusual in our flat upstairs. Despite the identical layout and living in the same house, their flat seems to be the only hotspot for these strange events. I often go downstairs to let their dogs out or grab cat food, and I've never felt uneasy or experienced anything paranormal myself. I've been trying to figure out why this might be happening and have come up with a few theories. 1. It could be due to strong electromagnetic fields in the house which might cause a kind of replay of past events, explaining the voices that sound like us. 2. Paranormal activity is sometimes thought to center around children, possibly because of their energy. Enzo's young age and high energy might be a factor. 3. Recently, Nick and Sarah brought several pieces of antique furniture into their home. It's said that spirits can attach themselves to objects. While the magnet incident happened before the antiques arrived, blessing the furniture might not be a bad idea. 4. Lastly, the area itself might be highly charged. 3 other nearby houses, 1 next door and 2 across the street, are said to have paranormal activity. I've personally seen a ghost at the house next to ours. It could be that the entire neighborhood is a hotspot for unexplained phenomena. Whatever the cause, the activity in their flat is undeniable. I'm still trying to understand why it's happening and why it's isolated to their part of the house. If anyone has any insights, we'd love to hear them. I think the best place for ghost hunting would have to be my college. Some of my friends have varying levels of a sixth sense, and the paranormal activity on campus is sometimes so strong that you can feel it even during the day, with students, teachers, and cars bustling around. It's fascinating if you're into that sort of thing. One of the most memorable experiences was a ghost hunt my friends and I went on the night before Halloween this year, October 30th. We started around 10:30 p.m. with a group of 4, me, my boyfriend, Jane, and John, names changed for privacy. I don't have a strong connection to the supernatural. I can pick up faint smells and sounds, but that's about it. My boyfriend, on the other hand, is highly sensitive. He can sense heat and cold and has a unique energy that attracts spirits, which often gets him into trouble. Jane can connect with ghosts and pick up residual memories, details about their emotions, age, and even names or events. John, like me, was more of an open-minded observer. Our destination was Holmdene, widely considered the most haunted building on campus. That night, we sensed 5 spirits, or 6 if you count the terrier. The terrier was the first spirit we encountered. The second was a boy named Michael who had drowned in the pond near Holmdene. Using the pendulum method, in this case my car keys, we tried to communicate with him. He answered a couple of questions but fled shortly after. In hindsight, this felt like a warning of what was to come. As we moved closer to the side of the building, Jane was drawn to one of the windows. She said she sensed a maid standing there, terrified of whatever was happening inside the room beyond the glass. Jane explained that the maid's fear was palpable, and she seemed to be trying to push us back, as if to protect us. Taking the hint, we decided to walk around to the back of Home Dean. At one corner of the building, Jane sensed a butler standing as if he were smoking a cigarette. My boyfriend also felt his presence, a cold, neutral energy. The butler, it seemed, was indifferent to us. While this was happening, I began to hear faint music, like it was coming from an old-fashioned record player with a horn. It sounded like waltzing music from the early 1900s. At the time, I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just students playing music. But the old-fashioned quality of it stayed with me. As we rounded the back of the building, my boyfriend suddenly felt hands pressing against him from behind. He had experienced this same sensation the night before while walking in front of Home Dean, so it immediately alarmed him. Jane then got the name Samantha and used the pendulum method to confirm it. According to the responses, Samantha was scared and clinging to my boyfriend for protection. This was unsettling enough, but what followed truly terrified us. John was the first to notice something strange. He said he smelled burning incense. We all stopped and sniffed the air. I picked up the scent of burning wood, like pine trees, while the others smelled cigar or pipe smoke. The smells seemed to symbolize different energies. Incense for a good spirit, pine for something neutral, and the tobacco scent for a potentially negative presence. Samantha, however, was visibly scared, clinging tightly to my boyfriend. We decided to ask her some questions about the spirit that frightened her. Samantha revealed that the spirit was a stableman from Bukowski Chapel, which used to be a stable. According to her, this man was bad news. His presence became oppressive as he followed us to the edge of Home Dean. John began experiencing sharp pain in his shoulders, and the cigar smell intensified, turning into the foul stench of burning rubber. We left as quickly as we could, with Samantha close behind. Later, something even stranger happened. Jane was temporarily possessed by Samantha, giving us a rare opportunity to ask her questions about her death. It was a dangerous and unexpected turn, but luckily Samantha wasn't a negative entity, just a sad one. Jane managed to regain control of her body after a few minutes. We ended the hunt around 1 a.m., with everyone feeling a mix of satisfaction and unease. That brings me back to the music I heard. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but later a friend of mine, who has a strong sixth sense, shared her own experiences at Home Dean. She mentioned a spirit on the third floor that she found deeply unsettling. This woman, my friend said, gave off a crazy and malevolent energy and often sang a disturbing song about burning and drowning children. When my friend sang a line from the song, I froze. It was the same old-fashioned music I'd heard during our hunt, with ghosts, demons, and angels seemingly around every corner, and even those without a strong connection to the supernatural feeling watched. Home Dean is a place like no other. The shadows there seem alive, and it's clear that the building is brimming with paranormal energy. In my opinion, it's the most haunted place in Michigan. I have recently begun compiling notes in a journal about my house and thought I would share what I have documented so far. The house was built in 1864, and from the moment we moved in, strange occurrences began happening. My son had just turned 2 when we moved in, and he immediately refused to sleep in his room. He complained about what he called eye pops, describing them as balls of light moving around his room like shooting stars. Despite spending many nights sitting with him in his room, we were never able to figure out what he was seeing. His room was decorated with Noah's Ark-themed items, but they wouldn't stay on the walls. Each time I re-anchored them, they fell again, sometimes even when no one was in the room. I initially thought my son might be pulling them down, but eventually, I removed the decorations altogether out of safety concerns. Around this time, my son also began having night terrors, often dreaming about witches who pinched him. I occasionally saw what I thought was my son's shadow darting across the hall or coming down the stairs, only to find him asleep in his bed. We frequently heard footsteps upstairs, especially in my daughter's room. Sometimes, the sounds would last for hours, as if someone were walking back and forth or moving objects. Yet, whenever we went to check, everything appeared undisturbed. In October 1997, I was woken at 3 a.m. by a woman's voice urgently calling my name. When I got up to check on the kids, I heard a child sobbing hysterically outside. I found my son standing on the brick area outside the house, crying uncontrollably. He said he had heard his father's voice calling him outside, but once there, another voice told him not to go into the front yard. He claimed he then saw Jesus sitting with angels on either side of him, holding his hands out. The vision terrified him when he realized he could see through the figure. A week later, while ordering pizza, my son pointed to the Little Caesars box and said, "That's what Jesus was wearing." This puzzled me as we weren't a religious family, and he wouldn't have had prior exposure to such imagery. After this, my son refused to sleep in his room, moving into mine for nearly a year. When he finally returned upstairs, he insisted on staying in his sister's room, as he refused to sleep where he could see his own room. Other paranormal events. Between 1996 and 2007, we experienced various unexplained events. Shadowy human-shaped figures were seen around the house, objects moved on their own, and vibrations similar to children jumping from the stairs would shake the dining room floor, even when no one was home. One time, while playing with his train set in the basement, my son saw the train suddenly start moving on its own. He was so frightened that he demanded we pack up the train set and sell it, which we did. My daughter, at around age 3, often talked to what she described as a little girl in a white nightgown who appeared in her room. Their conversations sounded mature, as though she were speaking to an older child. I have personally felt shadows crawl across my bed and have had my hands and feet grabbed while lying down. Once, while waiting for my husband, I heard the back door unlock and footsteps walk through the kitchen. I saw the reflection of a man in the window but discovered no one was there when my husband arrived moments later. Intensity increases. By 2006, the activity in the house intensified. One evening, as my daughter and I walked into the house, we heard a fierce growl. Thinking a dog had gotten in, I searched every room but found nothing. Similar growls were heard later in my bedroom and upstairs, where my son had an even more terrifying encounter. In February 2008, my son screamed in sheer terror from his room. He said he had felt a negative presence, followed by a growl near his ear. He fled down the stairs, breaking his toe in the process, and crawled through the kitchen to reach me. Since then, he refuses to go into his room after dark, even with someone else. We've also witnessed objects inexplicably move, such as a ring I lost outside that later appeared in my daughter's room. Shadows became a regular occurrence, often seen in reflections on glossy floors or mirrors. In one instance, a plastic object rolled across the kitchen floor, changed direction, and rolled back toward us. Paranormal investigation and Ouija board. After much persuasion, I allowed a paranormal investigation in 2008. Though the team noted some unusual energy, a thunderstorm cut the visit short. Strangely, the house was eerily silent for 2 days afterward. We also conducted a house blessing, during which the pastor noted turmoil in one room but otherwise felt no presence. In November 2008, I bought a Ouija board out of curiosity. My daughter and I used it twice, and both times it worked quickly. The spirit identified itself as WKI, claimed to have been born in 1802, and hinted at being buried on the land. While some answers felt plausible, I couldn't shake the feeling that it might not be entirely truthful. My son later used the board and received similar responses, but the experience left us both uneasy. Recent events. The occurrences have continued. Shadows are frequently seen both during the day and at night. On one occasion, I smelled a strong floral perfume in the living room, which grew so overpowering it made my eyes water. The smell matched a scent I own but hadn't used in months. Recently, while walking past the shower wall, I felt an icy breeze pass by me, as if someone had rushed past. Later that night, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room, though no one was there. Despite everything, my son feels safe in his current room, a newer addition to the house. We've tried to focus on making this space comfortable and untouched by the activity, and thankfully it remains relatively peaceful. In the summer of 2006, I had 2 mirrored crosses hanging as decorations inside the thick frame of the mudroom window. One day, while the kids and I were out, something strange happened. When we returned, The bottom cross had fallen off its nail and was shut inside the window. What stood out was that the cross was standing upright, as if it were holding the window open. The window itself was cracked at the bottom. This was unusual because the window doesn't shut on its own. You typically have to hit the pane with some force to open or close it. It has never done anything like that before or since. Over the years, we've seen many shadowy figures in the house. When the kids were little, we frequently mistook one shadow for my son, only to find him elsewhere. More recently, I've seen a figure that I've confused with my daughter. It matches her height, hair length, and even her gestures, but it always turns out that she's not home when I see it. My sister has encountered this same figure on several occasions. My son, now older, has also seen shadowy figures during the day. One in particular deeply unsettles him. This figure first appeared the day after a mysterious phone call that my son is adamant he did not make. He describes the figure as dark, around his height or slightly taller, about 5 feet 8 inches, wearing something resembling a hooded sweatshirt. The figure keeps its distance, usually standing about 8 feet away, sometimes pacing behind him. My son feels strongly that this entity is the same one that growled at him years ago. It only disappears after he acknowledges it, but its lingering presence deeply unnerves him. Escalation of activity. My sister and I have noticed patterns in the activity. It often intensifies when there are more than just the 3 of us, myself and my 2 children, living in the house. It also seems to escalate a week or 2 before significant events. For example, before a recent visit from my children's paternal grandfather, a man they hadn't seen since infancy, we experienced a surge in shadow sightings, heavy footsteps, and an overwhelming negative presence. Oddly enough, once the visit occurred, the house became much calmer. Last winter, a high school friend of mine stayed with us for 3 weeks while going through a divorce. During his stay, the activity reached a level that rattled all of us. After he left, the disturbances eased back to the usual bumps in the night. Disturbing incidents. One night, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. because my wood blinds were rustling violently. At first, I thought it was our cat trying to go outside, as she often paws at the blinds to get my attention. However, when I checked the window, I realized she wasn't there. She had been outside all night, as I had forgotten to let her in before bed. Our cat's behavior has always been peculiar. When the pastor came to bless the house, he even remarked on her odd demeanor and decided to bless her too. Since the blessing, which unfortunately provided only temporary relief, her behavior has worsened. She cries constantly, both inside and outside, and often hisses at nothing. The vet insists she's healthy, but her actions tell a different story. On several occasions, the cat has blocked doorways, preventing us from passing. She stands in the doorway with her fur standing on end, hissing, baring her teeth, and swiping if anyone tries to step over her. Last week, after an incident where I heard footsteps while on the phone, she attacked me when I tried to leave my room. One of her scratches was deep enough that it probably needed stitches. She sat in the doorway for the rest of the night, refusing to move. We've had to lock her in a room multiple times when guests visit because she will bite, scratch, and even chase them. This aggressive behavior is entirely unlike her old self. The bigger picture. The house blessing, though a temporary fix, calmed the activity for only a short while. Since then, the strange events have returned. My cat's erratic behavior seems connected to the activity in the house. While she used to be a calm and comforting presence, she now acts as if she's constantly on edge, sometimes violently so. Even small incidents, like the mirrored cross propping open the mudroom window, feel tied to the larger mystery of this house. The shadowy figures, unexplained sounds, and my son's troubling encounters all point to something that remains unresolved. Despite everything, we continue to live here, documenting what we can and trying to find a pattern in the chaos. Every time the activity escalates, I wonder what's next. In the summer of 2008, my husband and I moved into a rental home in a quiet suburb of Detroit, Westland, Michigan. It's an unassuming place, but Westland has a reputation for haunted locations, including the infamous Eloise Mental Asylum, just 4 miles from where we live. The asylum, once a massive complex with 78 wards, now stands in eerie remnants for decaying buildings and has been the site of countless ghost stories. Strangely enough, it feels like some of that energy may have followed us home. Since moving in, I've experienced unexplainable things. Sounds, smells, and sensations that my husband brushes off as figments of my imagination. But I wasn't imagining things before we moved here, so why now? He did admit to feeling uneasy one night in the kitchen, but for the most part, he dismisses my concerns. Yet, the strange activity always seems to happen when he's not aware of it. The activity begins. We moved into the house in October 2008, and soon after, unsettling events started to occur. Bad news seemed to follow us. My mother's boyfriend passed away the day after Thanksgiving. I suffered a miscarriage with twins, and my mom's boyfriend's mother was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. While these tragedies may not be connected to the house, they added to the sense of unease I felt here. Sleeping at night became a challenge. I wouldn't go to bed until 3 or 5 in the morning, long after my husband had fallen asleep. Even then, I had to lay awake for an hour, dreading the moment I had to close my eyes. I fear our bedroom. I keep the door shut when I'm alone and avoid going in unless I absolutely have to. The room seems to exude a cold, oppressive energy, making me feel watched whenever I glance at it from the kitchen. A cold and unnatural encounter. Yesterday, while on the phone with my mother, I walked past the bedroom door to grab my cigarettes from the bathroom. My bedroom has always been the warmest room in the house, thanks to baseboard heating and its small size. But as I passed the closed door, I felt an icy draft seeping from underneath, a sensation completely at odds with the room's usual temperature. Terrified, I paused, told my mom to hold on, and set the phone down near the bedroom door. Mustering my courage, I opened the door and was hit with a blast of freezing air so cold I started to shiver. The rest of the house, heated and cozy, felt normal, but my bedroom was like a refrigerator. Panicked, I grabbed my cigarettes, ran back to the couch, and told my mom what had happened. She began sharing her own strange experiences since her boyfriend's passing. Connections to my mom's experiences. My mother described how electronics in her Florida home, TVs, radios, and hairdryers, would turn on and off by themselves. At first, she thought it was a wiring issue, but that didn't add up. She had recently bought a new TV and radio, and both behaved the same way. The house's wiring had been updated when she and her late boyfriend moved in, so the possibility of electrical problems seemed unlikely. It made me wonder if the activity in both homes could be linked. My mom suggested it might be her boyfriend's spirit. He was a prankster in life, always loving and kind, but he enjoyed harmless tricks. Could he be trying to reach out to her, or to both of us? Odd objects and disturbances. In my own house, the strange occurrences have continued. The most unsettling is a big boy piggy bank my husband bought at a diner. It sits atop a tall armoire we recently purchased at an auction. No one touches it, yet it moves on its own. No matter where we place it, the piggy bank always ends up on the right-hand side of the dresser. The armoire is 5 feet tall, well out of reach of the neighbor's toddler, whom I occasionally babysit. The armoire is positioned next to my side of the closet, which also seems to have its own strange activity. I often hear thumping noises from my side, not my husband's. These noises happen regularly, especially late at night. Living in fear. Even though my husband hasn't experienced much, I live in constant fear. Loud knocks at the doors, unexplained smells, and the icy bedroom all contribute to my unease. I've started to wonder if I'm the focus of this activity. The strange smells, like the icy cold air, often appear when my husband is asleep or not home. What disturbs me most is the way the bedroom feels like the center of it all. I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me when I glance at the door from the kitchen. And yet, when I go in there, it's the overwhelming cold that sends me running out, seeking answers. By posting this here, I hope someone will believe me. I'm looking for logical explanations or even similar stories from others. Between the moving piggy bank, the thumping noises, and the chilling presence in my bedroom, I feel like I'm constantly on edge. The fear is exhausting, and I hope sharing this helps me find some clarity, or at least a bit of reassurance. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. For as long as I can remember, I've had experiences with the paranormal. My mother blames herself for it, saying I inherited this sensitivity from her. Whatever the case, I've always been aware of another world. A world full of disembodied voices, unseen presences, and inexplicable occurrences. To be honest, I don't enjoy it and usually do my best to ignore such things. But when something wants to be noticed, it doesn't give you much choice. Things took a significant turn after we moved from our old house into a newer one. The new house felt different, safer, and more welcoming compared to the angry, oppressive aura of our previous home. When I moved into my room, I made a loud agreement with the house, asking for peace and promising to coexist respectfully. For a while, it seemed to work. I felt calm, I slept well, and the house felt like a place where I belonged. But over time, things began to change. I started waking up in the middle of the night, gripped by the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The feeling became so intense that I started avoiding my room altogether, choosing instead to sleep on the couch in the family room. My mother noticed and asked why I wasn't using my bed. When I explained, she listened quietly but didn't offer much of a response. Living in the house brought the usual signs of paranormal activity. Items like car keys would go missing, only to reappear in spots we'd searched multiple times. Footsteps echoed on the floors when no one was there, and the stereo in the workroom would blare at full volume unexpectedly. My stepfather eventually started unplugging it when it wasn't in use, which stopped the interruptions. One of the most frustrating issues was my bedroom door. It would open and close on its own, and sometimes there would be knocking, but no one would be there when I checked. To cope, I began locking the door at night. One time, the door rattled violently, as if someone was trying to force it open, before angry footsteps stomped away. That's when the activity started to escalate. I began waking up screaming, filled with an unexplainable and overwhelming sense of terror. Sometimes I would leap out of bed and run to another room, too afraid to return for days. Then I started waking up with bloody scratches on my body, which only added to my fear. Eventually, the terror wasn't confined to my bedroom. I could be sitting in the living room when an oppressive, dark presence would settle over me. It felt like a mental attack, an invisible wave of uncontrollable panic that would drive me to flee from room to room. But no matter where I went, the feeling followed me. It became so bad that I started staying at a friend's house for days or even weeks at a time. Each time, I'd feel normal again and convince myself I could handle going back, only to have the cycle repeat. Then one day, as I sat in my room and felt the familiar dark energy creeping in, I decided I'd had enough. Standing up, I clenched my fists and shouted, "No more! This is my home, not yours. I will not be forced out." To my astonishment, the oppressive energy immediately withdrew. That small victory gave me the strength to keep fighting. For a while, I faced the fear head-on. I slept in my room, confronted the waves of terror, and refused to let it control me. Things seemed to improve until they got significantly worse. The activity escalated further, and it became clear that I was the primary target. The oppressive feelings returned stronger than ever, accompanied by a foul, untraceable stench that would fill my room before vanishing. Banging sounds began coming from the walls, and at night I would wake to the sound of nails scraping inside the walls or fists pounding on my door. One night, I got up to use the bathroom. Everything seemed normal until I returned to my bed. As I settled in, a raspy, angry voice hissed into my ear, "Jeremy!" I jumped out of bed, heart racing, but the house was silent. The clock in the kitchen read 3 a.m. This torment continued until I graduated high school in 2004 and moved to a friend's house in Oklahoma. From the moment I left, the fear and activity ceased entirely. I no longer woke up screaming or felt that oppressive energy. It was like a weight had been lifted. Years later, when I visited my mother, we talked about the past. She apologized, admitting she had known something was wrong. She avoided the upstairs entirely because of the heavy energy there. My old room, the largest in the house, had been turned into storage. No one wanted to claim it. She said the door would still open and slam shut at night, followed by restless footsteps pacing upstairs. One night, my girlfriend stayed at my mother's house, sleeping on the couch downstairs. At first, everything was fine, but when the house grew silent, the same pattern began. The door upstairs opened and slammed shut, followed by footsteps descending into the kitchen and the sound of keys being thrown onto the table. This continued throughout the night, leaving her deeply shaken. When I picked her up the next day, she recounted the experience with tears in her eyes. I felt terrible. I had hoped she wouldn't have to encounter what had tormented me. I still think about those years in the house and the relentless torment I endured. Whatever it was, it seemed to hate me specifically, and I'll never know why. It felt like I was battling something inhuman, something I can only describe as a beast. Leaving that house brought me peace, but the memories will always haunt me. When I recounted my experiences in the most recent house I lived in with my mother, I mentioned a previous house with a deeply unsettling aura. This is the story of that house. Unfortunately, living with paranormal activity was something my family seemed to accept as normal. It was always there, lurking in the background. Some family members, like my mother and I, acknowledged it, while others, like my father, chose to feign ignorance, even when confronted with the unexplainable. Growing up in a household divided between belief and skepticism made it all the more challenging for someone like me or my sister. Some believe houses have a life of their own, absorbing the energy of those who live there, happiness, anger, sadness, all of it. If that's true, the house in Michigan where we spent 3 years was the embodiment of anger or even sickness. It looked the part, too. An old, sagging shack with drooping window frames, dirty green siding, and a porch that looked ready to collapse at any moment. From the moment you stepped inside, a heavy, oppressive energy would press against you, as if the house itself didn't want you there. The feeling of being watched was constant, and it lingered over everyone who entered, whether they believed in the paranormal or not. Like many haunted houses, this one had the typical signs: disembodied footsteps, doors opening and closing, and objects moving or disappearing. One eerie occurrence was the sound of footsteps coming from the back of the garage, climbing the stairs into the hallway, and knocking on the kitchen door. When we'd answer, no one would be there. My sister had her own unique experience. Whenever she used the bathroom, the door would open on its own, no matter how securely it was closed. It's difficult to recount every event in order, but a few stand out vividly in my memory. One evening, I found my mother's old Polaroid camera and decided to take random photos around the house. Most of the pictures were ordinary, but one from the kitchen caught my attention. In the image, hovering just above the counters, were 2 shadowy figures with distinct heads, torsos, arms, and legs, unmistakably human-like shapes. I showed the photo to my family, and everyone was shocked. My stepfather, however, immediately began coming up with explanations. "It's a reflection," he said. "But it's nighttime and there's no glass cabinetry in the kitchen," I countered. "It must be light from another room. The only light on was in the living room, 2 rooms away. It's dirt on the film, in the shape of 2 people, and only on 1 photo." The back and forth continued until my stepfather gave up and refused to let me keep the photo. I never saw it again. The energy in the house seemed to concentrate in my sister's room. It was the epicenter of the house's hostility. Friends and family rarely stayed over, but when they did, they refused to sleep in her room or be left alone anywhere in the house. Even our pets avoided her room, sticking close to us as if they were afraid. One night, my sister was lying in bed, struggling to sleep. She felt an unshakable unease, her eyes drawn to the open doorway of her toy closet, which terrified her for reasons she couldn't explain. Rolling over to face the wall, she tried to block out the fear. Then she heard something. Turning back, she saw a ghostly figure of a man standing by her bed, glowing faintly with a light blue hue. She screamed and bolted into my room, refusing to return to hers for a week. My mother's room had its own share of strangeness. The house was built on a raised foundation, making even the first-floor windows difficult to access without a ladder. My mother's window, in particular, was nailed and glued shut for reasons we never understood. One day, she tried to enter her room but found the door wouldn't budge. It was unlocked, but no amount of force could open it. After confirming no one was inside, we removed the door from its hinges. What we found was baffling. Her heavy colonial dresser, made of solid oak and filled with clothes, had somehow moved across the room to block the door. The dresser was so heavy that it took 3 of us to push it back into place. This happened multiple times while we lived there. Another oddity was a small, quarter-sized hole above my mother's bed. Despite their carpentry skills, my parents could never patch it successfully. No matter what they used or how carefully they repaired it, the hole always reappeared within weeks, as though the wall itself refused to be fixed. The events in that house were deeply unsettling but not as personal or targeted as those I experienced later in life. Still, the house left its mark. In trying to understand why it felt so angry, we sought out its history. Unfortunately, records in the small town were sparse, and we mostly relied on stories from locals. One tale stood out. A man, returning home unexpectedly, discovered his wife in bed with another man. In a fit of rage, he killed them both before hanging himself from the tree in front of the house. Could this explain why the house resisted us? Was the bullet hole in my mother's wall a remnant of that tragedy? I'll never know for certain, but the oppressive energy and unexplainable phenomena we experienced there were undeniably real. I swear this to be true. I'm new to this site, so please forgive me if I make any mistakes in sharing my experiences. For some background, I'm 29 and consider myself pretty level-headed. I grew up in a Sinti family, which you might refer to as gypsy, where the occult and paranormal were regular parts of life. I didn't even realize that others didn't experience such things until I started school. But let me start at the beginning. When I was a baby, my mother divorced my father. She remarried when I was 5, and we moved to a single-wide trailer on a large plot of land in rural Louisiana. That's where the spirits of the past started to make themselves known to me and my sisters. The land had once been part of an old plantation, and there was a local tradition among the few neighbors in the area. Everyone would gather outside at night to listen to the sound of an invisible horse and wagon passing by. You could clearly hear the hooves on the gravel road, the clattering of chains, and the creaking of wooden wheels. It wasn't frightening. Now I know it was a residual haunting, like a recording of a moment stuck on repeat. But the nights inside the trailer were a different story. I can vividly recall the layout of that trailer and the fear that came with living there. Every night, my middle sister, who shared a room with me, my oldest sister, who had her own room, and my mother would all wake up at the same time. My stepfather, however, always slept through it. We'd hear the front door open, followed by heavy footsteps walking through the trailer to the kitchen. Then came the creaking of cabinets and the scraping sound of drawers being pulled open. The temperature would plummet no matter how hot it was outside. We could see our breath in the freezing air. Each morning, we'd wake up to find every door in the house wide open, every cabinet ajar, and every drawer pulled out. My stepfather was furious and thought we were playing a prank on him, but it wasn't us. My mother, like many others in our family, has the gift of sensing and dealing with spirits. Fed up with the nightly disturbances, she decided to confront whatever was causing them. One night, she called it out, and we all saw it. A dark, misty form rose from the floor and took the shape of a man. He glared at us as if we were the intruders in his space. My mother told him he was scaring her children and that he needed to leave. He responded with a mocking laugh before sinking back through the floor. Things only got worse after that. I began waking up at night to my bed shaking violently, as if someone were jerking it from side to side. Then, something would grab me and drag me to the floor. What I saw was unlike anything I had ever imagined. It looked like a grotesque gremlin. Its slimy skin glistened in the dark, and its cold fingers burned as they touched me. The grin on its face was pure malice, as if it enjoyed tormenting me. I screamed, and my sister, who could see it too, would start screaming as well. The memory of that creature's devious expression still haunts me. My mother eventually started having us sleep in her bed, hoping to protect us from whatever was tormenting us. Despite the fear and the chaos it brought into our lives, I never found out exactly what that entity was. I believe it was an earthbound spirit, one determined to cause harm and destroy our family. I've been caretaking a house in northern Michigan for over 2 years now, and up until 6 months ago, nothing unusual had ever happened. It all started subtly. Flickering lights and my cats staring at empty corners of the ceiling. It was almost amusing to watch all 3 of them suddenly focus on the same spot, heads turning in unison. They didn't seem scared, so I chalked it up to dust particles or bugs. The house is about 30 years old and hasn't had much work done since it was built, so I assumed the flickering lights were just electrical issues caused by the house's age. But last winter, things took a stranger turn. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to what sounded like a radio playing in one of the rooms. Static mixed with faint voices. Frustrated because I needed to be up early, I searched the entire house, including the basement and my daughter's room, but none of the radios were on. The sound eventually faded away, making me think the battery in some forgotten device had died. I dismissed it, though it lingered in my mind for the rest of the week. When it happened again a week later at the same time, 3 a.m., I began to worry. This time, the static was accompanied by the distinct sound of a man and woman whispering. Determined to find the source, I ventured into the attic in the middle of the night, like a cliché horror movie character heading toward their doom. Of course, I found nothing. Once again, the sounds faded after about 15 minutes, leaving me unsettled but with no answers. Things escalated when my 4-year-old daughter began having what I thought were night terrors. The first time it happened, I was jolted awake by her blood-curdling screams. My boyfriend was staying over that night, and we both ran to her room, terrified she'd hurt herself. She kept crying about the shadows giving her bad dreams. My boyfriend dismissed it, suggesting it might just be her way of trying to sleep in my bed, as I had been breaking her of that habit. I reluctantly agreed and let it go, hoping it would pass. For a while, the screaming stopped. But then, one night when I wasn't home, my boyfriend had his own chilling experience. He fell asleep on the couch and woke to a man's voice asking, "Where's Amy?" At first, he thought he'd imagined it. Then he heard the basement door slam and footsteps rapidly descending the stairs. Convinced someone was in the house, he ran outside, thinking it was me playing a prank or maybe a friend of his messing with him. But we live in the middle of nowhere. There were no cars, no headlights, nothing. The experience left him shaken, and he finally admitted that my stories might have some truth to them. After that, I began hearing voices too, sometimes during the day, sometimes at night. I could never make out what they were saying, but I'd hear laughter, crying, and even snippets of different languages. It became so frequent that I started losing sleep. Under a lot of stress at the time, I wondered if it was all in my head. I even scheduled a doctor's appointment, fearing I was hallucinating. Then the dreams began. One night, I dreamed my mother called me at 7 a.m. to tell me my uncle had died. When I woke up, the phone was ringing, and the clock read exactly 7 a.m. But it wasn't my mother. It was my daughter's daycare provider calling to tell me her mother had passed away. Similar incidents followed, and déjà vu became a near-daily occurrence. At times, I'd react to something seconds before it happened, as if I already knew what was coming. The strangest experience was seeing an apparition of a man in my front window. It happened so fast, but I distinctly remember noticing something bright red, though I don't know why it stood out. He spoke, but I was too terrified to understand what he said. That moment left a lasting impression on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he or whatever was in the house was trying to communicate something important. For now, the house is quiet again, though my daughter refuses to sleep in her room. She either stays with me or in the room next to mine, always with the lights on. She still talks about the bad dreams, and even my boyfriend is uneasy when he's here. I don't fear these entities, if that's what they are, but I can't ignore the feeling that they're trying to warn me or deliver a message. I've resolved to keep my eyes and ears open. Whatever it is, I'm determined to find out. The first time I remember encountering our ghost, Fred, I was about 5 or 6 years old. It was a Saturday morning, and I was watching cartoons. Suddenly, it got dark outside, and the power went out. Scared, I grabbed my sleeping blanket from the chair and wrapped myself in it, hiding as both my parents were asleep in the back of our mobile home. While under the blanket, I heard heavy footsteps, like someone running. Thinking it was my father, who is 6 feet 2 inches with size 13 feet, I peeked out. Instead of my father, I saw a dark shadow moving quickly from the hallway to the kitchen, passing through the living room and disappearing into the half-bath addition. Terrified, I buried myself in the blanket again and didn't emerge until my father came to check on me, apologizing for sleeping through the storm. To explain Fred, I have to go back to my father's first encounter with him in 1976. At the time, my dad lived in an apartment and had trouble opening the door one night. He claimed to see a shadowy figure leaning against it. Frustrated, he sat back down, only to hear a gunshot and a woman scream. Being a Vietnam veteran, he rushed to the door, which now opened without resistance. Outside, he found a man who had been shot by a neighbor upset over late-night TV noise. The police later concluded that if my dad had been in his car at that moment, he likely would have been the one killed. From then on, he believed the shadow had protected him. Curious about the entity, my father left a pencil and paper out on the table one night, asking for its name. The next morning, a single word was written: Fred. Since then, Fred has been with our family, following us each time we moved. My dad always made sure to say, "Come on, Fred, time to go," and Fred would somehow come along. Fred wasn't always subtle in letting us know he was around. He enjoyed pranks, like turning on the water whenever someone doubted the existence of ghosts or claimed they couldn't interact with the living. For the most part, we lived peacefully with him, but I've also seen him get angry. One of my more intense experiences with Fred was about 5 years ago, shortly after moving into a new apartment with my then-fiancée, now soon-to-be ex-wife. I began having recurring nightmares of a woman holding a baby and screaming at me to get out. At first, I dismissed it as stress from adjusting to a new place, but soon I started seeing and hearing her while awake. She was an angry, oppressive presence. Instead of running, I foolishly taunted her, daring her to do her worst. That backfired spectacularly. One night, while I was in the shower, she attacked me. I felt her cold, burning grip, and I ran out of the apartment in terror. I spent the night at my dad's house and told him what had happened. He told me I could stay, but he also suggested taking Fred with me for help. The next morning, before leaving, I said, "Fred, come on, brother. I need your help at my place." When I arrived at the apartment, I unlocked the door, but as I opened it, a blast of cold air pushed me back, and the door slammed shut. I couldn't reopen it. Inside, I could hear crashing noises and voices. My neighbors called the police, who tried to help me get in, but the door wouldn't budge. After 40 minutes, it suddenly popped open. The police entered first, but everything inside was perfectly in place, as if nothing had happened. Later that night, I caught a glimpse of a tall black shadow in the kitchen. I knew it was Fred. He had confronted and subdued the angry spirit. Over the next 2.5 years, I still occasionally saw or heard the woman, but Fred would always appear to keep her at bay. Curious about the apartment's history, I researched the area. The lake we lived on had been created by Henry Ford damming the Huron River for a car plant. Before that, it had been farmland. I learned that a farmer who once owned the land had married a woman from New York who despised farm life and didn't want children. She became pregnant despite her wishes, and when her brothers came to take the baby, she fled with the child. Both vanished, and locals speculated she fell off a nearby cliff, her body swept away by the river's currents. I believe that woman was the angry spirit in the apartment, trapped in her grief and anger. Fred, as always, protected me, just as he had done for my dad all those years ago. Fred has been part of my life for as long as I can remember. I have many more experiences to share, and I'll post them in time. For now, this is just one chapter of my ongoing journey with the paranormal. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I lived in Roseville, Michigan, near the Metro Detroit area. Even at a young age, I often felt uneasy in my house at night, especially when I was alone in the dark. There was always this persistent feeling that something was watching me. I would try to dismiss it, chalking it up to my imagination or fear of the dark. But deep down, I couldn't shake the sense that there was more to it than that. Occasionally, strange things would happen that were hard to ignore. Sometimes, the fear would become so overwhelming that I would run screaming through the house, hoping to find someone. If no one was home, I would sit outside until someone came back. Being around other people always made me feel safer, as if their presence could protect me from whatever it was. One night, long after midnight, my closet door opened on its own. I distinctly remember shutting it tightly. It had latched with an audible click. The only way to open it was by turning the handle, and yet there it was, wide open. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe I hadn't shut it as securely as I thought. But no explanation seemed to fit. I was terrified, but eventually I calmed myself down enough to sleep. Still, moments like that lingered in my mind. But there was one experience that changed everything and proved to me that what I was feeling wasn't just in my head. It was the summer of 1999 or 2000. My bedroom was set up so that from the head of my bed, I could see into the hallway that connected my grandfather's room and my little sister's room. One night, I woke up suddenly, feeling like something was off. It wasn't the kind of wake-up where you roll over and go back to sleep. It was the kind where you feel alert but don't know why. I glanced at the clock, but for the life of me, I can't remember what time it was. Then I looked into the hallway. The plaster walls and the doors to my grandfather's and sister's rooms were visible, both closed as usual. What caught my attention was a shadow, small, like that of a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. As I studied it, I noticed that it seemed to have small bumps or horns on its head. It was nothing more than an outline, a dark, shadowy figure, but it was unmistakable. A chill ran down my spine, and my entire body tingled with fear. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. Then it moved. My heart started racing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I knew I wasn't dreaming. And then I heard it. Hello! 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 The voice was loud, booming, and echoing in my head. It sounded like a young boy with a heavy British accent. Over and over, the voice repeated, "Hello! Hello!" I screamed. I must have screamed louder than I ever had in my life because the next thing I knew, my grandfather was in the hallway, asking me what was wrong. He looked concerned and confused. "Are you okay? What happened?" he asked. Still trembling, I said, "Didn't you hear that?" "All I heard was you," he replied. "What's going on?" I told him, "I think I just saw a ghost." That night I didn't sleep. From then on, I made sure to keep my bedroom door shut. To this day, it remains the most intense paranormal experience I've ever had. A few years later, I had another encounter in the same house that left me equally shaken. I was almost 13 at the time, lying on my futon mattress in the basement around 11 p.m. The TV was on, and I was just relaxing when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Thinking someone was coming down, I glanced over. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was my younger sister, or at least it looked like her. The only problem was that she appeared much younger than she actually was, maybe 5 years old instead of 10. She came running around the corner, stopped in the hallway, and looked directly at me. The expression on her face was one of pure shock, as if she hadn't expected to see me there. Before I could react, she disappeared. Instantly, just gone. Panicking, I bolted upstairs to check on her. I found her fast asleep in her room. I woke her up and asked if she'd been dreaming, hoping for some logical explanation, but she said no. Even though not all dreams are remembered, her response didn't make me feel any better. I made her come back downstairs with me, hoping to see if the figure would appear again, but everything seemed normal after that. Those two experiences stand out the most in my memory, but my life has been full of unexplainable moments. Sometimes I wonder if I might have some psychic abilities. I've heard that people with psychic tendencies are more likely to encounter the paranormal, and if that's true, it might explain why these things seem to happen to me. I don't know how to control or channel any abilities I might have, but one thing I'm certain of is this: ghosts are real. I've been living in my house for 10 years now, and over that time, I've experienced a variety of strange, unexplainable events. My first encounter happened when I was still in elementary school, and at the time, I didn't fully understand what was happening. Now, at nearly 18 years old, I've done some research and reflection trying to piece together what or who might be behind these occurrences. My first encounter was when I was about 9 years old. It was late, around 3 a.m., and I couldn't sleep. I was lying in bed when I heard a distinct sound, the clinking of cups on the counter and the bubbling noise from the water dispenser. Since I'd been awake the whole night, I knew it couldn't have been my parents. Their bedroom was right next to mine, and I was certain they hadn't gotten up. At the time, I was an only child, so there was no one else in the house who could have caused it. The next day, I told my mom about the noises. That's when she shared something that stuck with me. Before we bought the house, the previous owner, a man named Sal, had passed away on the porch while shoveling snow. From that moment on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sal might still be here. After that initial experience, I began noticing other strange things, like footsteps coming from the ceiling. For a long time, Sal seemed to become dormant. But just yesterday, things took a turn. Two of my friends, Emily and Jen, were hanging out. Emily was checking her email on her phone when she came across something bizarre. An email dated 1969. It had no subject, no body, and no sender, just the date. As strange as that was, it got weirder. Jen tried to take a picture of the email, but as soon as she snapped the shot, the message disappeared from Emily's inbox. The next day, Emily and Jen were looking through magazines during class. The first magazines they picked up all had covers or stories featuring events from 1969. It felt like more than just a coincidence. Whether it was fate, chance, or something else entirely, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected. That night, I was determined to go to bed at a reasonable hour. After finishing a show I had recorded, I turned off my TV and got ready for bed. But then, I started hearing an obnoxious clicking noise. It was loud and persistent, but I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. As I peered around my room in the dark, I noticed something on the wall, a shadow or silhouette. First, I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to upset whatever it might be. I searched for a light source that could have cast the shadow, but there wasn't any. Nervously, I rolled over and tried to convince myself to go to sleep, though my heart was racing. What happened next might be unrelated, but it was strange nonetheless. That night, I had a nightmare, the first one I could remember having in years. I almost never dream, or if I do, I can't recall them. But this nightmare was vivid, so real that I could feel it. My breathing quickened, and my heart pounded in my chest. When I woke up, I felt shaken and unnerved. As I tried to calm myself down, I heard a noise. My little brother, who's only 5 years old, was awake and restless. Normally, he's the kind of kid who could sleep through an atomic bomb, yet he couldn't sleep that night. It felt too coincidental that his sleeping patterns would suddenly change just as all these strange events were happening. I don't know for sure what's going on, but the series of events, starting from Sal's first appearance when I was 9 to the recent encounters, has left me with more questions than answers. Whether it's Sal or something else entirely, it feels like there's a connection I haven't yet uncovered. For now, I'll continue to pay attention to the signs and see where they lead. About 4 years ago, my husband and I were searching for an apartment when we came across a 3-bedroom unit on First Street in Jackson. From the moment we stepped inside, the place felt off, wrong, even. But given our circumstances, we didn't have much choice. The price was right, and it gave us the opportunity to finally get the dog we'd been wanting. So, despite my reservations, we decided to rent it. At first, it was just a creepy apartment in a rough neighborhood. The closet in our bedroom was always ice cold, and the door refused to stay closed. We'd shut it tightly, even pulling hard to ensure it wouldn't budge. But as soon as we left the room and came back, it would be standing wide open. After a couple of weeks of this, I convinced my husband to move the dresser in front of the closet, and we left it that way. The kitchen was another area that gave me an uneasy feeling. Constantly felt like someone was watching me from the attic door. In the 2 years we lived there, neither of us could bring ourselves to go up into that attic. It was as though some unseen force was warning us not to. Shortly after my mother-in-law passed away, things began to escalate. One morning, my husband, his dad, and his dad's girlfriend were all still sleeping. I was in the living room watching TV. The cat and dog were napping on the love seat when I heard a strange rattling noise. Above the couch, we had an octopus lamp with 4 arms and crystal chandeliers. I looked up to find the source of the sound, and to my shock, the 2 arms of the lamp above me were shaking violently while the other 2 remained completely still. It made no sense. How could 2 connected arms move independently of the others? Before I could process what I was seeing, the half of the couch I was sitting on started shaking. My heart raced, and just as I was beginning to panic, I noticed the Christmas tree. Half of the tree was shaking too, ornaments swaying and moving on one side while the other side was perfectly still. I was terrified but managed to muster up enough courage to shout, "Stop!" To my immense relief, everything stopped immediately. As months went by, things only got worse. My husband and I started arguing more than usual, and his drinking spiraled out of control. He spent most of his time in the bathtub, isolating himself. Then he started talking to someone who wasn't there. He said it was a little girl named Stacy. He claimed she didn't like me and didn't want me in the house. His words chilled me to the core. Meanwhile, our animals started behaving strangely, pacing the house anxiously or sitting in the living room and staring toward the kitchen for hours as if they could see something we couldn't. When the people living downstairs moved out, we went to check out their now vacant unit, thinking we might move into it for more space. In the basement, we found a lone standing wall with a pentacle spray painted on it, the twin points of the star facing downward, a symbol often associated with dark rituals. That discovery cemented my unease about the entire house. Thankfully, that house is now condemned. Since we moved out, things have been so much better. I've spoken with friends who visited us while we lived there, and they all said the same thing. They felt uneasy in that house, unlike anywhere else we've ever lived. The oppressive atmosphere, the arguments, the strange occurrences, all of it vanished once we left. Even now, I can't help but wonder, what was in that house that affected us so deeply? Has anyone else experienced something similar? If you have, I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's a mystery that still haunts me. My husband and I moved into this house less than a year ago, and since then, I've experienced some unusual activity. We have 2 children, a 6-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter. My daughter, even before she could walk, always seemed to interact with something unseen. It's been part of her nature since she was a baby. My grandmother, who raised me and was very close to my son, passed away in July 2001. Sadly, she never got the chance to bond with my daughter the same way, as her last year on Earth was marked by illness. I sometimes wonder if the presence I feel is her. It's just a feeling, but I strongly believe someone or something is with us in this house. The previous occupants were my husband's sister, her husband, and their 3 kids. When I asked my sister-in-law about any strange events during their time here, she said they had experienced nothing unusual. She added that if they had, they would have moved out immediately. I, on the other hand, am fascinated by the paranormal and far more open-minded about such things. Both my children were born on the 13th, April and June, which makes me smile at the idea of the unlucky number 13. It makes me wonder why some people are so closed off to the possibility of the unknown. This house originally belonged to my mother-in-law before she moved into an apartment to avoid the upkeep of homeownership. We've since taken over the payments. Built in the 1980s, the house doesn't have an extensive history that I know of. My mother-in-law bought it from its first owners, and neither she nor my sister-in-law's family ever reported experiencing anything unusual. The activity I've experienced is mild compared to what others describe in haunted houses. It's mostly small, unexplainable events. For example, the TV once turned off on its own after my husband and I had a brief argument about whether we should watch TV while eating dinner. It almost felt like someone was siding with me. That was the only incident my husband has experienced directly. I've had several moments where I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Figures passing by me. At times, they appeared adult-sized, while other times they seemed smaller, like a child. Every time I turned to look, nothing was there. Initially, I thought I might be imagining things, but the sightings became more frequent. Toys in my daughter's room sometimes start operating on their own, making noise late at night when everyone else is asleep. Occasionally, I'll hear rattling or shaking from her room as well. My daughter seems unbothered by these events. She'll come out of her room laughing and casually tell me, "Mama, there's a ghost in my room." At first, I doubted she even understood what a ghost was, thinking she might have learned the word from watching Scooby-Doo. But as this became a recurring theme, I realized she probably did know what she was talking about. She's never been afraid, no crying, no fear. For her, it's just normal. Another strange phenomenon I've experienced is flashes of light in my peripheral vision. When I turn to look, I sometimes catch a glimpse of the light fading away into nothingness. Those moments send chills up my spine and make the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Candles also flicker wildly when I sit and focus on these feelings, or when I'm researching paranormal topics online. Despite these events, there's been nothing negative or frightening about the presence in our home. I've made it clear to whoever or whatever is here that I'm not afraid. I've also set boundaries, saying that as long as no one is harmed and we can coexist peacefully, I'm happy to share this space. So far, this arrangement seems to be working. My family moved around a lot when I was a child, not because of anything paranormal, but due to my stepfather's job and other circumstances. My stepfather was a staunch skeptic, the kind of man who would rather be swallowed by the void than admit to the possibility of a haunting. As a result, any unusual experiences were often dismissed outright. Despite the frequent moves, I enjoyed seeing new places, attending different schools, meeting new friends, and, of course, living in various houses. Interestingly, I never lived in an apartment until I moved out on my own. In the mid-90s, we moved to a small house just a block away from my new school. It was a cozy home with 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, a basement, and a family room. I lucked out when it came to choosing rooms. For some reason, one of the bedrooms had been decorated with Super Mario Bros. Vinyl wallpaper and glowing star decals, making it the obvious choice for me. My mom didn't want to sleep in a room with cartoon characters on the walls, and although my stepfather suggested replacing the wallpaper, my mom yielded the room to me. This room, by size, was essentially the master bedroom, and my stepfather wasn't thrilled that a child ended up with it. During our time in that house, I experienced several strange events. I can't definitively say if they were paranormal, but they were unsettling, and what stands out most is that they never happened again after we left. One of the most frequent occurrences was sleepwalking. From time to time, I would wake up on the cold linoleum floor of the bathroom, shivering. I had no memory of how I got there, and this usually happened around 3:30 in the morning. Alongside the sleepwalking, I experienced recurring nightmares. Terrifying, vivid ones that would leave me shaken. These nightmares occurred 3 or 4 times a week, disrupting my sleep and making school days exhausting. My grades suffered as a result. Another recurring event was the sound of growling. While lying awake in my room, I would sometimes hear a deep, guttural growl coming from the center of the room. It wasn't just an ordinary noise. It was loud, almost animalistic, and deeply unsettling. On a few occasions, the bed would vibrate slightly as the growling filled the room. This always happened late at night, around 10 or 11 p.m., and left me terrified. Perhaps the most vivid experience was seeing a full-body apparition. One night, I woke to find a bluish-gray figure standing at the foot of my bed. It wasn't frightening. It reminded me of my mother, and I felt oddly calm. The figure stood there quietly, simply staring at me. I stared back for a while before eventually falling asleep again. When I told my mother about these experiences, she attributed them to childhood stress. Moving frequently and dealing with an abusive stepfather were challenging enough without adding the fear of the paranormal. She reassured me that my nightmares, sleepwalking, and strange sensations were likely due to the instability in our lives. It wasn't until I was 17 or 18 that my mother admitted something she had kept from me as a child. Many of the places we lived in were, in her opinion, haunted. She had chosen not to acknowledge or discuss these things while we were younger to spare us from the fear of knowing we might be living in haunted houses. Looking back, I'm still unsure what to make of those experiences. Were they the result of a turbulent and unstable childhood? Or were they the remnants of a spirit lingering in our physical world? I don't have the answers, and perhaps I never will. I'll leave it up to you to decide what you believe. Even I remain uncertain about the truth behind it all. The house we moved into was small and crudely built, as though the original owner had constructed it themselves. The floors, cabinets, and walls were uneven, and the original hardwood was cracked, filled with crumbs and dust. From the moment we arrived, it felt off, creepy, unsettling. But I had no choice. It was my first time living alone after leaving my significant other, and I moved in with my 2 small children to start fresh. The first night, after tucking my daughter into bed, I noticed an uneasy feeling about the closet in her room. Dismissing it as first-night jitters, I went to bed. But the sense of being watched didn't go away. It followed me to my own room, lingered around the basement, and clung to the kitchen near the basement door. Whenever I was in the kitchen, it felt like someone was standing in the basement doorway, silently watching. When I opened the closets, I felt piercing eyes on me, and going into the basement to do laundry was the worst. I could feel something near the crawl space, watching, breathing down my neck as I climbed the stairs. The feeling would only subside when I slammed the basement door shut. Still, I justified it all, telling myself it was just the fear of being alone for the first time. 2 weeks after moving in, my 18-month-old daughter pointed to the kitchen and said she was scared of the man who lived there. She told me his name was Charming and that he stayed in the basement. That was when I started to believe there was something in the house. Weeks later, as we drove home from my parents' house, she asked, "Are we going back to his house?" I replied, "No, we're going to our house." She shook her head and said, "No, Mom, that's his house." By that point, nothing overtly strange had happened, just the eerie feelings and my daughter's comments. I convinced myself that whatever, or whoever, Charming was, he wasn't trying to harm us. But that night, as I tucked her in and turned on her radio, the volume blasted so loudly that it startled me. Instead of music, there was a deep, rough male voice speaking in a language I couldn't understand. It sounded demonic. I quickly switched the station, trying to justify what I'd heard as a strange signal interference. For months, nothing significant happened. My boyfriend moved in and I told him a little about Charming, but he didn't believe in anything paranormal. Then one day, I came home from work to find him waiting outside. He said he didn't feel comfortable going back into the house alone. He told me about our bedroom door, which never stayed closed. It always swung back open, likely due to the house's uneven construction. To keep it open, we placed an old boombox in front of it. He swore he had put the boombox in place, left the room for 5 minutes, and returned to find the door closed and the boombox inside the bedroom. Days later, while I was in the shower, I heard footsteps pass the bathroom door 3 times, from the bedroom to the kitchen and back again. When I got out, I found my boyfriend asleep in bed, tangled in the blankets. He hadn't left the room. Another time, while doing laundry in the basement, I heard footsteps upstairs. When I went to check, no one was there. My boyfriend had gone to the store, and when he returned, I asked if he'd come back and left again. He said no. In the following weeks, small disturbances became frequent. The magnets on the entertainment center's cabinets would click together and apart, though the doors never opened. The TV turned on by itself a few times, and footsteps echoed in the attic. These minor events no longer fazed me. Things escalated again after my boyfriend moved across the state. On my birthday, I was home alone, sitting in the dark, feeling sad that my plans had fallen through. Suddenly, loud banging started coming from the attic. At first, I thought it was fireworks. It was July, but the sound was far too close and powerful. I realized it was hammering, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the attic floor to the opposite side of the house. Then footsteps moved back to the spot where the banging had started, and the cycle repeated. Banging, dragging, footsteps, over and over. I went outside and called a friend, but by the time she arrived, the noise had stopped. A week later, I had the creepiest experience yet. While lying in bed alone, I felt him, Charming, standing near my bed. He had never come into my room before, let alone stood so close. The air felt heavy with his presence, and I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. That was the last significant incident before I moved out 2 months later. I've been back to the house a few times. It remains vacant, and during the day, you can see straight through the windows. But at night, if you stand outside and look in from the side of the living room, you can see a flickering light, like a flame, coming from under the door of what used to be my daughter's room. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My grandparents live in a small 2-story house in Livonia, Michigan, built in the 1950s. They've lived there since my mom was 7 years old, and over the years, she's experienced countless strange and unexplainable things in that house. From as far back as I can remember, I've always had an uneasy feeling whenever I visited. Even when I was alone in a room, I felt like I was being watched. Some rooms gave me stronger feelings than others, but I'm convinced the entire house is haunted. The areas with the strongest energy are the guest bedroom, the entrance room, and the upstairs, including the playroom, my grandparents' bedroom, and the upstairs bathroom. I'm not the only one who feels this way. My mom, brother, and cousins have all had similar experiences. One of my first encounters happened when I was 7 years old, playing the card game Uno at the dinner table with my grandma and my cousin. From where we were sitting, there was a small gap between the staircase and the wall, allowing a view into the living room. My cousin, who was facing the gap, suddenly saw something out of the corner of her eye, a white figure of a man dancing in the living room. She didn't tell me about it until after we finished our game, but when she did, I believed her immediately. Couldn't have been our grandpa because he was at work that evening. The only people home were us and our grandma, all sitting together in the kitchen. That night, my cousin and I decided to sleep in sleeping bags on the living room floor. Neither of us wanted to sleep in the upstairs playroom or the guest room. They both creeped us out too much. As we tried to fall asleep, we heard strange noises coming from the kitchen, like someone sliding cups or plates across the table. We were scared but tried to ignore it, hiding under our sleeping bags until we finally fell asleep. The next morning, we told our grandma what we'd heard. She seemed hesitant to tell us anything at first, but we begged her to share if she'd ever experienced anything weird. Finally, she admitted that from her bedroom upstairs, she sometimes heard the sound of cupboards opening and shutting when no one was downstairs. Even now, whenever we visit, my cousins and I still hear noises coming from the kitchen and get that eerie feeling in the guest room and playroom. But my most recent experience happened in November 2010, and it still gives me chills. This time, my closest cousin wasn't there. She was visiting her other grandparents in Tennessee, so it was just me, my younger brother, and my 2 younger cousins. We were playing upstairs in the playroom, but eventually we got bored. That's when someone suggested we try to communicate with the ghosts. We thought they might be friendly since they'd never done anything to harm us before. We all sat in a circle on the floor and started asking questions. At first, nothing happened, and we didn't hear any answers. Then I had an idea. I placed a doll on the windowsill and said, "If there's anyone else in this room with us, could you please knock this doll off the windowsill?" Almost immediately, the air in the room seemed to shift. My cousins and I looked at each other with wide eyes, as if silently asking, "Did you feel that too?" Too scared to stay, we bolted downstairs for dinner. After eating, we went back to the playroom to check on the doll. It was no longer on the windowsill, it was on the floor about a foot away from the window. That was the last significant experience I've had at my grandparents' house, though my mom has many more stories of her own from growing up there. Maybe someday she'll share them too. For now, the house remains a place of mystery, one that continues to leave me wondering about the unseen world we sometimes feel so close to. When I was 10 years old, I lived in a small 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. One summer morning, around 10:30 a.m., I woke up and found everything as it should be. My closet was shut, the radio was off, and the fan was unplugged. I headed to the kitchen to grab breakfast, enjoying the quiet as I chatted with a friend over the phone. As I was eating, something told me to look up. Casually, I glanced upward and froze. Standing there was a girl about 5 feet 6 inches with brown hair. She was wearing what looked like a sundress or a nightgown that fell to her knees. Her head was tilted slightly as she stared at me. I screamed, bolted out the door, and called my grandpa. When we went back into the house, everything had changed. My radio was blasting, the fan was on, and the closet door was wide open. A year later, we moved into a new house, and for a while, everything seemed to be going well. But then, last 4th of July, I was at a friend's house with a small group of people. We were swimming, laughing, and enjoying the holiday. By the end of the night, only 3 of us were left: Felicia, the host, Brittany, and me. We decided to take some pictures to remember the evening, and at first, nothing seemed unusual. Later, when we looked back at the pictures, we noticed something horrifying. In one of the photos, there was a face in my hair. It wasn't a friendly face either, it was menacing. All 3 of us saw it and we were shaken. But when I tried to show the picture to my mom, it was gone. After that, my friends thought it would be funny to scare me by pretending Brittany was possessed. I admit I was terrified because of how much I believe in ghosts. As part of the prank, Brittany threw candy from the bed onto the floor, but something unexplainable happened. When the candy landed, it formed the shape of a devil's face, complete with eyes, a mouth, and horns. Brittany immediately broke character, panicking as she swore she hadn't done it on purpose. She was standing on the bed, and there was no way she could have arranged the candy like that. The worst part? The devil's face looked exactly like the face from the photo that had appeared in my hair. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. 9 months later, this past April, I woke up one morning from a vivid and terrifying dream. In the dream, I was in the woods being attacked by something I couldn't see. When I woke up, my chest burned. Looking down, I saw 3 distinct scratch marks running across my chest. They didn't look like normal scratches, they were thin and sharp, more like cat claws. But I don't own a cat, and I couldn't have done it to myself. I even compared the marks to my nails, but they didn't match at all. The strangest part came later that week. On Friday, I was watching an episode of Ghost Adventures. In it, Zach Bagans described being scratched on his back by a demonic entity. When he showed the scratches, I couldn't believe my eyes. They were identical to the ones on my chest. I don't know what's been happening to me or why these things are following me, but I can't ignore the feeling that something malevolent might still be nearby. In the winter of 2009, my husband and I moved into a larger home to accommodate our 3 children. We were all excited about the new beginning and spent a solid week working on the house before officially moving in. At first, I had no reason to think the house might be haunted, and the first few days went by uneventfully. A week after moving in, I was home alone, getting ready for work, when I heard a loud bang against the wall. It sounded as though someone had been shoved into it or like a basketball had been thrown at the house. I assumed it must have been kids playing outside, so I went to check. To my surprise, there was no one around. The street was quiet. I felt confused but shook it off, thinking it was just an odd occurrence. However, over time, the banging sounds continued 4 or 5 times in total. My husband even experienced it twice himself. Not long after that, I was alone again, getting ready for work. While in the bathroom putting on makeup, I heard what sounded like a small child jumping off my bed onto the floor. Startled, I rushed into the bedroom, but there was nothing there. By this time, I had started catching glimpses of something out of the corner of my eye near the hallway connecting the living room to the bedrooms. It was brief, but I would see what looked like a white t-shirt or nightgown, along with the outline of a shoulder and arm, walking toward the bedrooms. As time passed, the activity grew more frequent. I began hearing the sound of cabinet doors banging in the kitchen and the door itself rattling. It wasn't just me noticing these things. Friends who visited began experiencing similar phenomena. On more than one occasion, I saw what looked like a small figure peeking around the corner from the hallway into the living room. One night, while cleaning the kitchen, the house was quiet, and everyone was asleep. As I was wiping down the counters, I thought my husband had come into the room and sat at the table. Without looking up, I said, "I thought you were sleeping?" When he didn't respond, I glanced over, and no one was there. I checked the back bedrooms, and sure enough, Everyone was sound asleep. The experience rattled me. It had felt so real. After months of relative quiet, the activity started up again, but this time it was different. While vacuuming, I noticed something odd in the carpet, a child's shoe print, the kind of dress shoe you'd expect from the 1940s. The size looked to be about that of a 5-year-old's foot. My youngest child is 9 years old, so it couldn't have been theirs. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. Recently, I've started feeling physical touches. Last week, while cooking dinner, the kids were outside playing. I was bent down, looking for a lid in the cupboard, when I felt a soft nudge on the back of my head. It wasn't painful, just noticeable. Assuming it was one of the kids playing around, I turned to scold them, only to find the kitchen empty. 2 days later, I was in my bedroom watching TV when I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. It was followed by the sensation of light pressure, as though a finger was touching me. When I looked down, I could actually see the faint imprint of a finger on my arm. I've tried not to show fear, even though these experiences are unsettling. Instead, I've started speaking out, saying things like, "Okay, I know you're here," in an attempt to acknowledge the presence without provoking it. However, now that I'm being touched, I plan to call my cousin, who investigates paranormal activity, to look into the situation further. While I try to remain calm, it's clear that whatever is in this house is not content to stay in the background. I'm determined to uncover the truth behind these strange events and hopefully find some answers and peace for my family. In 1991, when I was 11 years old, my family moved into a larger house in a new city. With 6 kids in the family at the time, we were excited to have more space. A 4-bedroom home that felt like a fresh start. But like any dysfunctional family, our joy was often clouded by challenges. We'd had CPS, Child Protective Services, involved in our lives since I was in the 3rd grade, though I'd rather not delve too deeply into that now. What I will share is how this house became the setting for my first haunting experience. When we first moved in, everything seemed normal. The house was spacious, and we settled in quickly. But one day, things began to change. A friend of mine was over, and we were all sitting at the dining table, which connected to the living room. Suddenly, the TV turned on by itself. My friend thought it was some kind of joke. She laughed nervously and asked, "Okay, who did that? Who has the remote?" My mom calmly replied, "We don't have a remote." That freaked my friend out so much that she left. After that, strange things started happening more frequently. By the time I was a teenager, the house felt anything but ordinary. I'd come home from school to the sound of clinking and movement upstairs. Assuming my brothers were home, I'd head upstairs to check, only to find no one there. This became routine. I'd hear footsteps, banging, or whispers when no one was home, and it made me feel like I was never alone. I avoided staying in the house by myself at all costs. Some of the scariest moments came late at night. I often woke up around 3:30 or 4 a.m. to get a drink of water. One night, as I reached to turn off the kitchen light, I saw something in the reflection of the window, an old woman staring back at me. She wasn't doing anything, just standing there, watching me. Terrified, I left the light on and went straight back to bed. I saw her reflection many times over the years, and the experience never got any less unsettling. Bedtime brought its own set of eerie occurrences. After everyone else had gone to bed, I'd lie awake, listening to footsteps coming up the stairs. I counted each step, one of my strange habits, until the sound stopped at the top of the staircase. Every time, I waited for my mom to come in and say something, but she never did. One night, after weeks of hearing these phantom footsteps, I got out of bed and went to ask my mom if she'd just come upstairs. She looked at me from the dining table, where she always sat, and said, "No, now go back to bed." Her answer left me puzzled, but I knew I wasn't imagining what I'd heard. As time went on, things became even more chaotic. CPS eventually removed all 7 of us kids from the home, placing us with family or in foster care. We were allowed supervised visits with our parents, but it wasn't the same. My aunt, who took me in, often found ways to bend the rules and let me visit my parents unsupervised. On one visit, my dad pulled me and my aunt aside and said, "Come here. I want to show you something." He led us upstairs to my bedroom, where he had been repainting the walls as part of the conditions for our return. "I was bending down to get more paint on the roller," he explained, "and I thought I'd bumped into the wall, so I checked my shirt for paint. My dad always wore black t-shirts, and there wasn't a speck of paint on him. That's when I noticed this," he said, pointing to the half wall that opened into my room. There, perfectly visible in the light from the window, were little handprints. They looked like they belonged to a child no older than 4 or 5. The fingers were spread apart, as if the child had pressed their hands on the wall to catch their balance. "The kids weren't here for any visits, and your mom wasn't home," he added. "I have no idea how they got there." The sight of those handprints sent chills down my spine. Before this, I'd heard my siblings' toys going off by themselves, but I had dismissed it as nothing. Now, I couldn't ignore the reality of what was happening in that house. Even after we left the home, my parents continued to experience strange events. My mom and dad both shared stories of unexplainable noises and feelings while living there alone. Looking back, that house holds a special place in my memory, not for the excitement of moving in or the challenges we faced, but because it was the setting for my first haunting experience. I'll never forget those footsteps on the stairs, the old woman in the window, or the child-sized handprints that seemed to appear out of nowhere. They were all reminders that, in that house, we were never truly alone. In 1991, when I was 11 years old, my family moved into a larger house in a new city. With 6 kids at the time, we were thrilled to have more space in the 4-bedroom home. It felt like a fresh start for our dysfunctional family, though life was far from perfect. Growing up with CPS, Child Protective Services, frequently involved in our lives since I was in the 3rd grade, we'd learned to live under a cloud of uncertainty. I'd rather not revisit those details. I've worked hard to leave them behind, but they form part of the backdrop for what was to come. When we first moved in, everything seemed fine. I remember the excitement of exploring the new house and settling into our rooms. For a while, it felt like things were looking up, but slowly, strange occurrences began to creep in. One day, a friend of mine came over. We were sitting at the dining table, which opened into the living room, chatting casually. Out of nowhere, the TV turned on by itself. My friend, thinking it was some sort of joke, laughed nervously and asked, "Okay, who did that? Who has the remote?" My mom calmly replied, "We don't have a remote." The disbelief on my friend's face quickly turned to fear. She left shortly after, visibly rattled. That incident was just the beginning. Over time, the strange activity escalated. By the time I was a teenager, the house didn't feel like a refuge anymore. It felt oppressive. I'd come home from school and hear noises upstairs, clanging, thudding, or shuffling. Each time, I assumed my brothers were home, but when I went upstairs to check, the rooms were always empty. It became so routine that I never felt truly alone in the house, and I refused to stay there by myself. Late at night, things became even more unsettling. I often woke up around 3:30 or 4 a.m. to get a drink of water. Each time, as I reached to turn off the kitchen light, I'd catch a glimpse of something in the window's reflection. An old woman staring back at me. She wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. It was so terrifying that I stopped turning off the kitchen light altogether and would quickly retreat to bed instead. This happened for years. Nighttime brought other disturbances too. As I lay in bed, I would hear footsteps slowly ascending the stairs. I had a habit of counting the steps, and every time they stopped at the top just outside my room. Expecting my mom to come in, I would wait, but no one ever did. Finally, after weeks of this happening, I got out of bed and went to ask her. She was sitting at the dining table, as she often did late at night. "Mom, did you just come upstairs?" I asked. She shook her head and said, "No, now go back to bed." Her calm response left me both puzzled and unnerved. Life in that house was chaotic in more ways than one. CPS eventually removed all 7 of us kids from the home, placing us with family or in foster care. My aunt took me in, and the rest of my siblings were placed elsewhere. While the state allowed only supervised visitations, my aunt, kind and rebellious, would take me to see my parents without CPS's knowledge. During one of these visits, my dad showed us something strange. He was repainting the walls in my old bedroom as part of the conditions to regain custody. "Come here," he said, leading us upstairs. "I want to show you something." He explained how, while bending over to load his paint roller, he thought he'd accidentally leaned into the wall. "I started checking my shirt for paint," he said. "But then I noticed this." He pointed to the half wall at the entrance of my room. There, perfectly visible in the light from the window, were small handprints. They looked like they belonged to a child no older than 4 or 5. The fingers were splayed, as if the child had pressed their hands on the wall to catch their balance. "The kids haven't been here for visits, and your mom wasn't home," he said, his voice tinged with confusion. The prints weren't smudged, they were clear, deliberate impressions. Looking back, I realized there had been signs all along. My siblings' toys would sometimes go off by themselves, and I had dismissed it as a quirk of old electronics. My mom later shared that she, too, experienced unexplainable events in the house after we were removed. My dad and brothers also admitted to hearing things they couldn't explain. That house was my first real experience with the paranormal. I'll never forget the old woman in the window, the footsteps on the stairs, or the child-sized handprints on the wall. Whatever was in that house, it made its presence known in ways I'll carry with me forever. It's been a while since I shared my last story here. Back then, the activity in my house wasn't too intense, but things have changed since then. I still see figures moving from the hallway into the living room. Sometimes the house goes quiet, no activity for a while, which gives us a bit of relief. But soon after, something always happens again, leaving us on edge. In my previous story, I mentioned the most unforgettable experiences that made me believe my 3-bedroom rental house might be haunted. I left out some details due to space, but I often get an uneasy feeling in specific areas of the house, particularly the bathroom, my bedroom, and the basement. One day, while I was taking a shower, I had one of these moments. As I rinsed the conditioner from my hair and wiped my face, I noticed something to my left. Through the shower curtain, I saw the shadow of what looked like an older person, hunched slightly and moving slowly. It was there for just a split second before disappearing. Thinking it was my husband, I pulled back the curtain, but there was no one there. I had clearly seen the outline of a human figure, the back, the head, and even the side profile of a nose. I finished up quickly and got out of there. At the time, I didn't share this with anyone, unsure if it was my imagination. A couple of weeks ago, something similar happened. I've always felt the presence of at least 2 spirits in the house, a woman and a child. Occasionally, I sense a man as well, though his presence isn't as strong. From my living room, I often see the small figure of the child darting around quickly, almost running, while the other figure moves at a normal pace. I've seen them peek around corners or stand quietly, watching. It's unsettling, but I've gotten used to it. One particularly hot night, I decided to take a shower before bed. The house was unusually quiet, leaving me feeling uneasy. After my shower, I opened the bathroom door, turning off the light as I did. At that moment, a full-body shadow raced past me into the bathroom. It was small, no taller than 3 or 3.5 feet, and it moved so fast that its body slanted as it turned the corner, like a child running at full speed. The next day, I shared the experience with my husband, and he suggested it might be a child spirit. Later, my best friend visited and sat in my chair in the living room. She hesitated before telling me that the last time she visited, she had seen a little girl in the hallway, staring at her. She described the girl as wearing a dress that looked like a pilgrim's outfit. My friend's house is also haunted, and she often sees spirits, so I didn't doubt her. 2 weeks ago, I was up late and decided to go to bed around 2:30 a.m. My husband was already asleep, and I left the TV on a low volume as usual. As I lay in bed, I heard muffled voices in the hallway. At first, I thought it was the TV, so I muted it, but the voices continued. It sounded like a woman talking to a child. I stayed still and listened until the voices faded away. It made me think that the woman I've seen might be protecting the child, ensuring we're not a threat before letting the child reveal itself. This memory took me back to when we first moved in. While getting my taxes done, I mentioned our new address to my accountant. She looked surprised and told me, "Oh, you live on the old Indian burial grounds." I was shocked but hadn't experienced anything unusual at that point. Yesterday, another strange thing happened. I was cleaning the kitchen and took a break to sit at the computer. One of our kitchen light fixtures has had a burnt-out bulb for months. Suddenly, I noticed the reflection of light flickering on the wall. Confused, I turned to see the light turning on by itself. My 13-year-old daughter was watching TV, and when I told her, she looked just as shocked. As I approached the switch to turn it off, I realized it was the burnt-out bulb glowing brightly, flickering, and dimming as if trying to send a message. I was completely stunned. We haven't experienced any touching recently, but the figures, voices, and strange occurrences continue. It's scary but also exciting, leaving me wondering what will happen next. It all began on a calm, beautiful night. I was driving home, cruising in the Mustang I had just purchased, when my phone rang. It was my best friend, and he sounded terrified. A rare thing for someone as tough and fearless as him. He had stayed behind while his girlfriend and her family went on their annual summer trip to New Mexico. He started explaining what had him so shaken. He said he was watching TV with his dog by his side when, out of nowhere, a glass flew across the kitchen and hit the wall. Hearing this, I drove faster than I ever had before, covering 10 miles in record time. When I arrived, I found him outside on the porch, smoking a cigarette, visibly shaken. I asked him to recount exactly what happened. He told me he had been dozing off in the living room, in that half-asleep state where you can still hear what's happening around you. His dog suddenly started barking at the front door, but when he got up to check, no one was there. Baffled, I stepped inside the house, only to find it eerily empty. As the night went on, something about the house felt off. It's usually full of energy, with kids running around and laughter filling the air. But that night, it was silent and unsettling. Around 12:30 a.m., as we sat in the living room next to the kitchen and the stairs leading to the master bedroom, we both heard loud, clear footsteps coming down the stairs. The sound was unmistakable. We froze, our hearts racing. Determined to figure out what was going on, I drove back to my house to grab my camcorder, which had built-in night vision. We set it up in the kitchen, facing the sink and cupboards, and left to grab some food. When we returned 45 minutes later, we reviewed the footage. For the most part, it seemed normal, except for one chilling moment. A shadowy figure walked from the basement stairs toward the door wall before disappearing. We also kept hearing a strange clicking sound, but we debunked it being the fridge since it made a completely different noise. That was just the first night. The next morning, exhausted but determined, we cleaned the house thoroughly. We put everything in its place, turned off the fridge, deep freezer, and even the air conditioning to eliminate any potential sources of noise. That evening, we returned to find something strange. The silverware separator had been pulled out of the drawer, but the silverware remained inside. It was unsettling, to say the least. Later that night, I decided to provoke whatever was in the house. I announced that I wasn't afraid and invited it to touch me, talk to me, or even hurt me. I wanted answers. First, nothing happened. But when I asked it to make a sound, there was a loud bang on the wall that nearly made me jump out of my skin. Determined to investigate further, I headed into the basement with just a digital recorder and a lighter. I placed the recorder on a table near the stairs and started asking questions. Suddenly, I heard shuffling across the floor, followed by a voice saying, "Help!" When I listened back to the recording later, the word was clear, a Class A EVP. As we watched the footage from the kitchen camera, another violent bang echoed through the house, sending my friend's dog into a frenzy. The second night ended with us more shaken than before. By the third night, we were already on edge the moment we stepped inside. The atmosphere of the house seemed to weigh on us. My friend decided to try communicating by writing, "What do you want?" in big capital letters on a piece of paper. We left the camera rolling in the basement and stepped outside for a smoke. That's when things escalated. My girlfriend's car doors locked on their own as she tried to open them. Her car, a 2010 model, uses a remote clicker to lock and unlock the doors, and we heard the horn beep as it locked. It was impossible to ignore. When we finally went back inside, the sounds from the basement were chilling. The footage captured the sound of a pen sliding across the tile floor, followed by footsteps going up the stairs, through the living room, and toward the spot where my girlfriend's keys had been left. It was as if the entity had deliberately locked her car. The following day, we reviewed the recordings again. As we were walking back into the house on the footage, a voice on the digital recorder whispered, "They're coming." Another loud bang from the basement sent us searching, and underneath the spot where we heard the noise, we found a check belonging to the original owners of the house. Was this their way of trying to communicate? Were they asking for help? Later, research revealed that every family who had lived there before left after 3 years. In each case, the parents had divorced while living in the house, something that also happened to my friend's girlfriend's parents after 7 years of living there. Before they moved out, we captured one final chilling moment. The paper where my friend had written, "What do you want?" had been marked. Above his writing, in staggered lowercase letters, was the word "help." They moved out shortly after returning from their vacation. I still have all the tapes and recordings from those nights. My fiancé and I moved into our current home about a year ago. It's a newer house in a quiet residential neighborhood, with no known history of anything sinister. While I've always been open to the idea of the paranormal, I've never personally experienced anything until now. 2 weeks ago, I thought I heard a voice while I was sleeping. I asked my fiancé if he had said anything, but he was sound asleep. Convincing myself it was a dream, I turned over toward the closet, which is behind our always closed bedroom door. As I debated getting up for a glass of water, I froze. Near the closet door, I saw a fuzzy, white shape. It wasn't clear, but I could make out enough to see it pass beneath a sweater hanging nearby, moving it slightly. The shape disappeared within moments. Confused but not scared, I convinced myself I must have imagined it and went back to sleep. After that night, I began waking up between 3 and 4 a.m. consistently. Sometimes it was because of noises. Other times the room just didn't feel right. 3 nights after seeing the fuzzy figure, I woke to a sound like something falling or someone stumbling. In the same spot as before, I saw the shadowy figure of a tall man. His form was hazy and oddly shaped. This time I was a bit frightened. I turned to press my face against my fiancé's back and willed myself to sleep. He didn't wake up at all, which felt unusual. For nights ago, the pattern continued, but things escalated. I woke suddenly because the temperature in our usually humid bedroom had dropped to an icy chill. Even though it was the middle of summer and our industrial fan was blowing at full strength, I was shivering. My skin was cold to the touch. As I opened my eyes, I saw the same man again. This time, more distinct and wearing a wide, unsettling grin. My heart pounded, and without thinking, I jumped up and swung at him. The moment I moved, he vanished. My heart raced, and I couldn't stop shivering. I tried to wake my fiancé, poking and speaking to him, but he didn't stir. This was so unlike him, it only added to my growing fear. I planned to stay awake until sunrise, but exhaustion eventually took over, and I fell asleep. The next day, I finally shared my experiences with my fiancé. We had a long conversation about the possibilities of what could be happening and what we might do. Talking to him helped ease some of the fear I didn't realize I'd been carrying. He found it odd that he hadn't woken during these episodes, as he's usually a light sleeper. The day after that, I was online at work, chatting with a friend on my laptop about what had been happening. As I described the figure, my friend suggested it might be a shadow person, because of how I initially described it as shadowy and not fully formed. Just as I was about to explain that it had become more distinct during the third encounter, the temperature in my workspace plummeted. At the same moment, my laptop shut down. It hadn't overheated and it was plugged in. When I checked the bottom of the device, it was cool to the touch. What made it even stranger was that my friend, thousands of miles away, messaged me shortly after I rebooted my laptop. He told me his computer had completely shut off too, as if it had lost power, yet nothing else in his home was affected. The coincidence left us both unnerved. Though I've tried to rationalize these experiences as dreams, imagination, or coincidences, a few things keep nagging at me. The temperature drops in consistently warm places, the simultaneous malfunctioning of both computers, and most of all, the way the figure smiled at me. That grin. It was so intimidating, so haunting. It's the one thing I can't shake, even during the day. I'm not sure why this entity is here or what it wants, but the image of the grinning man lingers in my thoughts long after the encounters. It's something I can't forget, no matter how much I try to rationalize it. In November 2010, I was nearly 7 months pregnant and ready to move out of my parents' house. My mom's best friend told us her brother-in-law had a house for rent just outside of town. It seemed perfect. I've always lived in the middle of town, where houses are close together, so pulling up to a house in the middle of a field with no streetlights and an old farmer as the nearest neighbor gave me the creeps right away. As we approached the house, I noticed an old homemade wheelchair ramp leading to the door. Curious, I asked about it, and the landlord explained that his brother, the previous owner, had built it for his wife, who had lupus and needed the house to be wheelchair accessible. Thinking nothing more of it, I signed the lease and planned to move in after Christmas. December 27th, move-in day. The move went smoothly, but there were a few random noises and a peculiar comment from my mom. "It's that lady." I didn't think much of it at the time. It took me about a week to muster up the courage to spend the night alone. That first night, I was curled up on the couch watching TV when the security light on the garage suddenly flicked on. Staring out the kitchen window, I tried to figure out if it was an animal or something else. Then I heard the faint sound of footsteps coming from the loft above me. I immediately turned the TV down, straining to hear, but the noise stopped. Not wanting to leave the comforting glow of the TV, I pulled the covers over my head and forced myself to sleep, waking only when my dog barked frantically in the middle of the night. The next night, my boyfriend stayed over. I told him the house creeped me out when I was alone but didn't mention the footsteps. Later that week, his brother moved in with us while he was off work for the season. Spending his days alone in the house, he started telling us he could hear someone walking around or moving things in the loft, which was completely empty. I tried not to let these things get to me, but one night, after our daughter was born, something happened that we couldn't ignore. My boyfriend and I were woken up by our bed frame banging against the wall. He grabbed onto it to stop the shaking, but it kept hitting the wall. When it finally stopped, we were so disoriented that we mumbled, "What the hell?" and went back to sleep. The next morning, I asked him if he remembered, and he said he thought it was a dream. But when we moved the bed frame a few days later, we saw a large mark on the wall where he had held it that night. It was real. After that, there were more strange noises, and one night, the rack in our closet fell with a loud crash. I called the landlord, who reassured me that the woman who had lived there hadn't died in the house and was one of the nicest people he'd ever met. July 2011, a touching encounter when my grandfather passed away. I received a Build-A-Bear that I had made for him, meant to be a keepsake for my daughter. One night, my daughter was fussy and wouldn't sleep, so I took her to her bedroom to rock her. In the dark, I grabbed the bear and said, "Grandpa is going to help you go to sleep." Almost immediately, her touch lamp, which was 10 feet away, turned on. My daughter started smiling. I didn't know whether to cry or feel scared, but I whispered, "Hi, Grandpa," and continued rocking her until she fell asleep. Last night, footsteps on the ramp. My boyfriend's brother came home and stood by the storm door, chatting with me about his day. As we talked, he mentioned needing to grab a rug from his truck. Suddenly, our dog started barking like crazy, and we both heard footsteps coming up the ramp. I asked, "Who's here, Ajay?" He looked out the door with a blank expression and said, "Nobody." The dog didn't stop barking. Today, my boyfriend told me that his brother admitted to seeing a shadow when he heard the footsteps but didn't want to freak me out. His face told me he wasn't lying. Now, I can't help but wonder, could the same presence in the loft also be outside? Do spirits have the ability to move things like shaking our bed? And if I were to get rid of the ramp, would that upset her? If it's the woman, is she trying to tell us something? Or could she do more than just shake the bed? I'm originally from Grayling, Michigan, and as a teenager, my friends and I often made trips to the local haunted spot, Pear Cheney Cemetery. If you've never been, getting there isn't easy. It's tucked away in the middle of nowhere in Crawford/Roscommon County. The cemetery is only accessible by a deeply rutted two-track road, so if you have a low-set car, don't even try it. You'll likely end up stranded. Let me give you a local's perspective on Pear Cheney, cutting through the usual myths. Here's the real story. In 1873, Michigan Central Railroad completed its line between Gaylord and Jackson, and around the same time, George Cheney received a land grant from the railway to establish a stop for gas, freight, water, and passengers. The area, previously called Center Plains Township, grew rapidly. Cheney built a sawmill and a hotel, the Cheney House, to accommodate settlers, lumbermen, and tourists. By 1877, Pear Cheney boasted 2 sawmills, a general store, a wagon maker, 2 carpenters, a doctor, a hotel with telegraph services, and daily mail service. Lumber was its primary export. The cemetery was established in 1878 on about 5 acres southeast of the town. By the late 1800s, however, Pear Cheney's population began to decline sharply. It went from around 1,500 people to just 55 by 1901 and a mere 18 by 1917. The post office closed in 1912, and the land was auctioned off in 1917. Most of the remaining families were farmers in the surrounding areas. Disease played a significant role in the town's decline. Diphtheria swept through Pear Cheney twice in 1893 and 1897, killing many, including multiple members of single families. One such tragedy was the Barber family, who lost 3 children in just a few weeks over Christmas in 1893. Fires, often sparked by the mills, also contributed to the town's demise. Contrary to popular lore, there's no evidence that neighboring townspeople burned Pear Cheney to stop the spread of disease. The town simply faded away, like many others during Michigan's lumber boom. The myths of Pear Cheney: ask anyone in Grayling, and they'll probably tell you about the witch of Pear Cheney Cemetery. The story goes that she cursed the town with plagues and fires after being banished to the woods. Some even claim she's buried in the cemetery. But let's be realistic. If the townspeople really thought she was a witch, they wouldn't have buried her with everyone else. This theory is pure folklore with no historical basis. The cemetery itself has seen plenty of vandalism over the years. Many gravestones have been destroyed by people partying and drinking there. There's even a story about a Crawford County sheriff who, as a kid, desecrated a grave and drove around with a human skull in his car. How awful is that? On the other hand, some visitors leave mementos out of respect, like flowers, dolls, rosaries, and candles. Unfortunately, these items often disappear quickly, thanks to a local gentleman who cleans up the cemetery daily. What's more common are beer cans, bottles, and garbage left behind by less respectful visitors. Is Pear Cheney Cemetery haunted? I believe it is, but not as dramatically as some people claim. Over the years, I've visited the cemetery around 200 times. Out of those visits, I've had about 10 strange experiences. Here are a few examples. Car malfunctions. My car radio once switched channels on its own, and another time my car wouldn't start, even though it had been running fine. Children's voices. On several occasions, I've heard children laughing and giggling very close to the car, late at night. Handprints. One time, after leaving the cemetery, I found small handprints all over the roof of my car. Apparitions. On Halloween in 2002, 3 friends and I saw a woman in a light-colored dress walking through the back of the cemetery. She vanished right before our eyes. That's about it, though. I've never seen a witch, been chased, or felt overwhelmingly sad or scared there. There's definitely an unusual energy, but I feel that way in most cemeteries. It's nothing unique to Pear Cheney. To me, Pear Cheney is a fascinating place with a rich history and an air of mystery. While the myths may not hold up to scrutiny, the strange occurrences I've experienced keep me coming back. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, Pear Cheney Cemetery is a place that lingers in your memory. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I'm a 20-year-old junior at a university in Michigan, and I believe my house might be haunted. Looking back, I've had a few strange experiences throughout my life that I never gave much thought to until now. When I was about 5 years old, I was obsessed with the Swan Princess movie. For my birthday, I received a figurine of the main character, Odette, along with the prince. I remember setting them down to grab more figurines from my room, but when I returned, Odette was gone. I searched everywhere, but she was never found. Between the ages of 5 and 8, I often saw figures that I now believe were shadow people. They would walk in a single file line down the hall and into my bedroom, surrounding my bed. The sight of them terrified me, so I started closing my bedroom door at night to avoid seeing them. Another memory stands out from when I was 10 years old. I was flipping through old photo albums and found a picture taken during the winter on our back porch. In the reflection of the window, there was a light, and next to it, the figure of a middle-aged man in what appeared to be a war uniform. When I tried to show my family and friends, I couldn't find the photo again, no matter how hard I looked. I still think about it. Fast forward to today. I recently moved into a house near my college with 5 other girls, and strange things have been happening. My roommates have shared their own unsettling experiences. Hearing footsteps, feeling cold spots, and the sound of objects dropping and rolling. One of them even said her sheets were lifted off her while she was lying in bed. She asked the ghost to leave her alone and not hurt her, and the sheets immediately dropped back down. Another roommate's boyfriend, who spends a lot of time at the house, said he often hears movement and has seen the TV change channels on its own. These stories made me nervous, so I decided to research the history of our house. I found a website stating that a 60-year-old man passed away here in 1930. When I shared this information with my roommates, they became even more frightened. About 2 weeks ago, I had a strange and terrifying experience myself. I had a dream, or at least I think it was a dream. In it, I felt a tense pressure in my shoulders, and I heard a voice saying something about a massage. I tried to wake up, but it felt like I was already awake. The experience was confusing, and it sounds silly when I describe it now, but at the time, it really scared me. Last night, something happened that prompted me to share my story. At 4 a.m., all of us were startled awake by a loud crash. It sounded like it came from the upstairs hallway, right outside our bedrooms. We searched for the source of the noise but found nothing that could explain it. After hearing my roommate's experiences and reflecting on my own, I truly believe our house is haunted by the man who passed away here. I don't think he wants to hurt us, but his presence is undeniable. I'm confused and unsure of what to do. Could this escalate into something dangerous? Should we try to communicate with him? Or would that make things worse? I was very young, around 4 or 5 years old, so I don't remember much about the house I grew up in. Most of what I know comes from research, stories shared by my mother and grandfather, and a few personal experiences of my own. The house is located in Byron, Michigan, and was built in the 1850s. Over the years, it served different purposes. Initially, it was a residential home until the 1920s, then a hospital until the late 1940s or early 1950s. After that, it became an old person's home until the late 1960s or early 1970s before reverting back to a residential property. My grandfather bought the house in the late 1980s from an elderly couple. They warned him that the house was haunted, sharing stories of unexplained occurrences, but my grandfather dismissed their claims, assuming they were just old and imagining things after living alone in such an aged home. Once he moved in, strange things started happening. He would hear footsteps and banging noises at night, which he initially blamed on his teenage kids sneaking out. At the time, my grandfather was divorced and had 3 high school-aged kids living with him. Although his kids did sneak out occasionally, they insisted they weren't responsible for the noises. When they eventually moved out, the unexplained sounds continued. When I asked my mother about her experiences, she shared some chilling accounts. She remembered hearing voices, creaking stairs, running water, even when the main water line was turned off, and footsteps on the carpet. She also told me about hearing babies crying. Her room, it turns out, had once been divided into a nursery and a surgery room when the house was a hospital. One particular night stood out for her. She was alone in the house, hearing footsteps and voices. Feeling terrified, she called my father to come over immediately. At the time, my father was a Marine, fearless in almost every situation. But as soon as he entered the house, he felt chills run down his spine. He told her she looked pale, like a ghost herself. I also asked my grandfather about his scariest experience. He said that sometimes, in the middle of the night, he would wake up to a cold draft on one side of the bed. He could feel it move to the other side, as if someone were walking around the bed. Then, it would stop, as though standing still beside him, before suddenly vanishing. After the cold draft disappeared, he would smell the faint scent of perfume, which he believed belonged to the spirit of a woman from the 19th century. As for me, I was too young to fully understand what was happening. But I do remember feeling nervous from time to time, much like my mother and grandfather did. The house always seemed to carry an uneasy energy. When my grandfather first bought the house, he and his kids discovered old hospital equipment in the basement and various items in the attic, including what they believed to be Civil War-era blue and red military uniforms, along with stacks of old newspapers. In the early 1990s, my grandfather and uncle unearthed what they believed to be horse bones while tilling a garden near the house. To add to the house's history, it was once part of the Underground Railroad during the American Civil War. Looking back, the house held an undeniable presence, deeply tied to its history. This experience happened when I was about 8 years old. It was Thanksgiving, and my entire family was gathered at my grandparents' house. Normally, I slept on a pull-out couch in the back room with my mom, but because the house was packed with relatives, my mom and I ended up sleeping in the basement bedroom. My grandparents had 13 grandchildren in total, and I was the oldest girl. There were 8 boys older than me and 1 younger. The next girl didn't come along until I was 5, and she lived across the street from my grandparents. That night, I was the only little girl in the house. My 2 older brothers and 3 of my cousins were all sleeping in the living room upstairs. I've mentioned before that I've always had a thing about basements, and it stems from this particular one. Something about it always made me uneasy. I'd rush down the stairs whenever I had to go down there, avoiding lingering on them. The corner beneath the stairs was especially unsettling. It always felt like something dark was pacing back and forth there, day or night. When you came down the stairs, the washer and dryer were in the far corner. In the opposite corner, my grandpa had built a small room about 8 by 12 feet, with saloon-style swinging doors. Several times, I'd come down the stairs and see someone peeking out from behind those doors. The moment I saw them, the doors would swing as though someone had just let go of them. I could see a face but never feet. Each time, I'd check the room, thinking one of my brothers or cousins was hiding in there, but the room was always empty. So, when I learned I'd be sleeping in that room with my mom, I was scared. Still, I figured I'd be okay with her there. That night, I woke up to the sound of the doors swinging. I've always been a heavy sleeper. Back then, it took something loud or someone shaking me to wake me up, so this was unusual. I ignored it, rolled over, and tried to go back to sleep. As I lay there, I realized I really needed to use the bathroom, but the thought of going near the stairs in the dark filled me with dread. The only light switch for the basement was at the top of the stairs, and my grandma had turned it off when we went to bed. I stayed in bed as long as I could, hoping I'd fall back asleep, but eventually, the urge became overwhelming. I knew I'd have to make a run for it. I bolted for the stairs. As I reached them, I glanced back and saw a man standing at the saloon doors. He turned and walked into the room as I raced up the stairs. I still don't understand how my mom, a light sleeper, didn't hear me running. Those stairs creaked loudly. After using the bathroom, I hesitated at the top of the stairs. My uncle, who was sleeping on the pull-out couch, woke up and asked what I was doing. I told him I'd just gone to the bathroom. He nodded and went back to sleep. I stood there, dreading the trip back down. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and when I opened them, I froze. A little girl was standing at the bottom of the stairs. She had shoulder-length black hair, wore an old-fashioned nightgown with a high neckline, and had piercing green eyes. Though her lips didn't move, I heard her voice clearly. She warned me, "Don't come down. They're after you. If they catch you like they caught me, you'll regret it." Before I could react, the shadow I'd always seen pacing in the corner flew toward her, engulfing her in an instant. She vanished, and the shadow stood in her place, beckoning me to come down. Terrified, I backed away and moved out of its line of sight. Then I sprinted to my grandfather's room, closed the door, and climbed into bed with him. I pulled the covers over my head and lay there shaking until he noticed I was there. He asked if I was okay, and I told him I didn't want to go back downstairs. He let me stay with him, wrapping his arm around me. I rested my head on his shoulder and fell asleep almost immediately. The next morning, my mom asked why I hadn't stayed in the basement. My grandfather, covering for me, said he'd heard me in the bathroom and told me I could stay with him. My uncle backed this up, saying he'd seen me at the top of the stairs. I never slept in that basement room again. Whenever the subject came up, my grandfather always found a reason to keep me out of it. I never had the chance to investigate the house or the property my grandparents owned, but I hope to do so one day. Maybe when I visit this summer to help Amy and Robert, I'll look into it. If I find anything, I'll be sure to share an update. I've lived in this house for several years now. In the early days, a few odd things happened, but nothing too out of the ordinary, certainly not enough to stand out as paranormal. However, about 2 years ago, strange events began to occur more frequently and noticeably. One early example was when a guest at my house had a small box thrown at him seemingly out of nowhere, with no apparent cause. As time went on, these occurrences became more frequent. Doors would randomly open, though no one saw it happen, and there was no one else around who could have done it. I also started noticing visual phenomena, such as fleeting shadows 2 or 3 times. Occasionally, electronic devices would turn off on their own without explanation. Individually, these incidents could be explained away as coincidences or quirks of the house, and I've always approached such things with a skeptical mindset. But about a year ago, something weirder started happening, something more personal. I had begun experimenting with relaxation exercises, simple breathing techniques to calm myself. I would practice them in a dark, quiet space to avoid distractions. During these sessions, I started to feel an odd sensation, as though I were being watched or even touched, particularly on my hands, feet, or face. At first, I shrugged it off as a trick of my mind. But these sensations began to occur more frequently, even when I wasn't meditating. Sometimes I'd feel as though someone, or something, was trying to hold my hand or lightly touch me, even during the day when I was around other people. It was subtle but persistent. I dismissed it as my imagination. Over time, though, these sensations took on a more adult nature. I'd feel pressure at night, particularly in the dark, accompanied by a noticeable electrostatic-like feeling, especially in certain areas of my body. The sensations were most intense during thunderstorms, which were frequent that year. It began to feel as though something was drawn to me, following me and seeking interaction. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to address it directly. I asked it to leave. The sensations stopped immediately. For a while, everything was normal again, but I grew intrigued and called it back out of curiosity. The phenomena resumed, as if on command. While it wasn't a particularly logical thing to do, my interest in the possibility of life beyond death compelled me to see what would happen. I allowed the interactions to continue for a while. At no point did I feel afraid or threatened. Whatever it was, if it wasn't just my imagination, it felt oddly comforting to have around. However, as time went on, I began to question the nature of this presence. I considered various theological possibilities but couldn't settle on any one explanation. Eventually, I decided I'd had enough and asked it, firmly this time, to stop. Once again, the sensations ceased immediately. Since that time, nothing has happened. Whether this was all a psychological phenomenon or something external, I cannot say for sure. But it was an experience unlike anything I'd ever had before. If it was truly an entity, it felt benign and even calming, though its persistence raised many questions. I wanted to share this story and welcome any feedback on possible explanations, whether psychological, spiritual, or otherwise. It's been a year now, and the house has been quiet ever since. When I was being babysat by an older cousin in Taylor, Michigan, something happened that I'll never forget. I was sitting on the couch with my cousin, and my uncle was nearby in a chair. After he left the room, I noticed the basement door creak open. I heard 2 loud thuds and froze. My cousin asked if I was okay, but I just nodded, staring toward the basement. That's when I saw it. A man crawled out from the basement toward us. He wore a brown leather coat, had a foul odor, and his face was skeletal. He moved his head side to side, as if deliberating, and kept staring directly at me. Panicked, I screamed and jumped onto my cousin. My uncle rushed in, but neither he nor my cousin could see what I was describing. The figure slowly retreated toward the basement door and disintegrated before reaching it. I never felt comfortable in that house again. Oddly, all 5 members of that side of my family passed away within a couple of years of each other. To this day, I feel that whatever I saw played a role in their misfortune, and in some of the strange events that followed. Childhood experiences from a young age. I frequently had night terrors and vivid dreams that felt almost too real. I could smell, feel pain, and even wake up physically exhausted from running in my dreams. They always involved hiding from 2 men in period clothing who said they would find me. By the time I was 7, my younger brother and I both began seeing things that couldn't be explained. One night, around 2 a.m., we both woke up to get a drink of water. As we reached the hallway, we saw an elderly woman sitting in a rocking chair. Thinking it was our grandmother, I asked, "Mama, what are you doing here?" She replied, "Babies, I'm not your mama, but go get your drink and head back to bed." Confused, we listened to her. When we returned, she was gone. At breakfast, my mom denied that anyone had visited. The shadow months I grew older, my night terrors returned, becoming more vivid and violent. One night, my brother and I were asleep in my room when I heard the doorknob turn. I thought it was my mom checking on us, but the footsteps were too heavy. A shadowy figure appeared, slowly creeping toward the foot of my bed. I felt the bed compress under his weight as he leaned closer. Summoning all my courage, I jumped up and shouted, "Go away!" When I turned on the light, the figure was gone. The house was quiet for a while after that, but I continued to feel watched in the basement. Sometimes, I'd hear a man whispering, but when I'd ask my mom if my dad was home, she'd remind me he was at work. The night terrors returned, showing me horrific, vivid images I couldn't explain. To cope, I began drawing them, dating and detailing each scene, hoping to find a pattern. The last incident with the shadow man was unforgettable. Late one night, I heard rustling in the living room. Peering down the hallway, I saw a figure picking up family photos and placing them into a garbage bag. Thinking it was a burglar, I yelled, "Hey!" The figure turned, revealing a misty black form with glowing red eyes. It said, "I have all of you now." I screamed for my dad, who searched the house but found nothing. Soon after, we moved to a newly built home. The truth comes out years later. My mom revealed why we left that house. She told us that the previous owner, an elderly woman, had died of a heart attack in the living room. When my brother and I reminded her of the Mama incident, she admitted she believed it was the woman's spirit but didn't want to scare us at the time. When I asked about the shadow man, she became emotional. She said, "Your dad saw him too. That's why we moved. He couldn't take it anymore." Recent encounters as an adult, I've continued experiencing the paranormal. My latest move, to a late 1800s home in Wisconsin, has been especially challenging. Renovations stirred up activity, including sightings of a misty figure and hearing a little girl's voice say, "I'm right here." We even captured footage of our dog reacting to the voice and an orb flying past. Recently, we blessed the house, and for the past few days, it's been peaceful. These experiences have shaped me, sparking a lifelong curiosity about the unknown. While I once feared sharing these stories, I now embrace them. They've taught me to approach the paranormal with a mix of skepticism, curiosity, and respect. If you're looking for a scare, this isn't that kind of story. But if you enjoy exploring the unexplained or puzzling over strange phenomena, this might interest you. Although I was quite young when these events occurred, I still remember most of them clearly, and I can promise that everything I share here is true. The trailer and the thin lady. When I was little, my family lived in a trailer on a small dirt road with a few other trailers lined up alongside it. Each had its own large backyard and driveway, making it feel more like a series of standalone homes rather than a trailer park. I haven't looked into the history of the area, but that trailer held a strange energy. I often felt the presence of a woman, someone I'd never met but could somehow sense. She seemed tall and thin, always wearing a violet-purple dress. I didn't see her physically, but I knew she was there. The trailer had 2 bathrooms, one with a bathtub and another with just a stand-up shower. The bathroom with the tub felt fine, though I sometimes felt like someone was nearby. The other bathroom, however, was different. It felt isolated from the rest of the trailer, and whenever I was there, I felt uneasy, like I had to watch my back. The feeling of being lifted. One day, I was lying face down in the living room with my eyes closed when I felt hands grab my hips as if someone was trying to lift me. Startled, I opened my eyes and looked around, expecting to see one of my parents, but I was completely alone. Freaked out, I stayed close to them for the rest of the day. If this had been the only strange event, I might have written it off as my imagination. But later, I overheard my parents talking to friends, describing similar occurrences. Window shades opening and closing on their own, knocks on windows and doors, voices coming from the backyard, and even the sensation of being lifted while lying down. When I heard that, I realized it wasn't just me experiencing these things. The neighbor's yard. One oddity I've never been able to figure out was our neighbor's yard. My dad once warned me never to go over there, saying the neighbor was a wizard. I didn't believe in wizards, but his warning made me think twice. Their yard always looked the same. Nothing ever moved, the grass never changed, and their car stayed in the same spot. It almost felt abandoned, like whoever had lived there left everything behind. To this day, I don't know what to make of it. The move to the apartment. Eventually, we moved to an apartment about 15 to 20 miles away. The strange occurrences didn't completely stop, though they became less frequent. One night during a storm, I had trouble sleeping because of the heat in my room. I finally fell asleep but woke up later from a bizarre nightmare. As I lay there, I heard rhythmic scratching at my door. Too scared to check, I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I asked my parents if it had been them, but they had no idea what I was talking about. The woman's hand. The final experience I had was also at night. I was a scaredy cat back then, so I always slept facing the wall, not wanting to see anything in my room. I had just lain down and closed my eyes when I felt a hand grab my shoulder and tug, as if trying to turn me over. The hand felt distinctly feminine, long, skinny fingers, unlike the thicker hands of most men. Terrified, I yelled, "Leave me alone!" I'm not sure how loud I was, but it worked. From that day on, the strange events stopped. Reflections. I've often been told it was just my imagination. But how could that explain the similar experiences my parents had? They described hearing voices, feeling touches, and encountering other unexplained phenomena too. Perhaps some things are simply beyond explanation. Even now, I occasionally think about those events, wondering what was truly going on in that trailer, and whether it followed us to the apartment. Wherever it went, I'm grateful it decided to leave me alone. The experiences I'm about to share took place in my childhood home, which was newly built for my family in 1994, the year I was born. No one has ever died in the house, but I was told it was built on old farmland, along with 3 other houses. The original farmhouse, for houses down from us, still stands, now renovated and occupied by a family. It's possible the activity I experienced stems from the land itself, but I'm not sure. All I can share are the unexplained events that have happened to me since I was a child. The first encounter, the earliest and most startling experience, occurred when I was about 5. My neighbor and best friend, who was 7 at the time, had come over to play. It was around 5 p.m., still light outside, and we decided to play one of our favorite, but admittedly silly, games. We'd sit on my bed, pull the window shade down to darken the room, and try to scare ourselves, though we usually just ended up talking. That day, We got bored and decided to go downstairs for a snack. Afterward, we returned to my room, completely unaware of what was about to happen. I walked in first and immediately felt something was wrong. I stopped in the middle of my room, frozen. My friend, confused, asked, "What?" Something compelled me to look at the corner of my room. When I did, I saw her, an older woman standing in the corner, staring directly at me. She had big glasses, a long, matronly dress, and an apron. Her entire figure was white and transparent, almost glowing. She didn't say or do anything, but her presence alone was enough to terrify me and my friend. We bolted from the room, screaming, and tried to explain to my mom what we had seen. Of course, she didn't believe us. Summoning our courage, we reluctantly returned to my room, but she was gone. The corner was empty, with no objects or shadows that could have been mistaken for a figure. I asked my friend to describe what she'd seen, and we both matched each other's descriptions exactly. Even now, at 18 and 20, we still swear by what we saw. The second encounter, the second time I saw her, was about a year later, when I was 6. I was staying up late watching TV with my mom and realized I had left my blanket on the staircase landing. I walked through the hallway to retrieve it, and as I bent to grab the blanket, I felt someone watching me. I looked up toward the top of the stairs, and there she was again. The same woman, leaning over the railing, peering down at me. She was just as I remembered, white, transparent, and eerily still. By then, I'd had several smaller paranormal experiences and was beginning to get used to strange occurrences. Though seeing her startled me, I simply grabbed my blanket, shook off the encounter, and returned to the couch without mentioning it to my mom. The last encounter over time, the fear of seeing her again began to weigh on me. I felt uneasy sleeping in my room, constantly afraid she'd appear without warning. One night, after feeling watched yet again, I finally decided to confront her. Sitting up in bed, I spoke aloud. "I don't know what you're trying to do, or why you're here. I'm sure you're a really nice lady, and maybe you're just looking out for me, but I'm scared of you. Could you please leave me alone? I'm sorry." From that night on, she was gone. I never saw her again. Reflections. Even now, I wonder who she was and why she appeared to me. I've tried to research the property's history but haven't found anything significant. My best guess is that she was a kind, elderly farmwoman who had passed away and felt a connection to me as a little girl. But the truth remains a mystery. I plan to share the smaller paranormal events from my childhood in The White Lady That Haunted My Childhood too. For now, I hope this gives you a glimpse into the strange and unexplained experiences that have shaped my early years. As I shared before, I was haunted by a mysterious white lady throughout part of my childhood. I've told you about the main occurrences, but now I want to share the smaller, unexplained moments that happened in between. While these incidents were less significant, they were still strange enough to stick with me. The feeling of being watched. I constantly felt like I was being watched, especially in my room and the upstairs hallway where all the bedrooms were. This unsettling sensation is what made me start needing a nightlight as a child, and, truthfully, I still use one to this day. One night, I was cleaning out my closet, but forgot to close the closet door before getting ready for bed. About 30 minutes after lying down, I was still trying to fall asleep when the feeling of being watched crept over me again. Suddenly, a plastic bag flew out of my closet, halfway across the room, and slowly floated to the ground. Another time, I was trying to sleep when I heard a noise from under my bed. I had a little toy piano, the kind every kid has at some point. I always kept it tucked under my bed, so I wouldn't accidentally step on it at night. As I lay there, I heard the switch click on, followed by a single note being played. Both times, I bolted out of my room and ran straight to my parents' room to sleep with them. A voice at the bathroom door. One evening, around 7 p.m., my mom, brother, and I were watching TV together. I got up to use the bathroom and closed the door behind me. While I was in there, I heard a light knock on the door, followed by a woman's voice asking softly, "What are you doing?" It was gentle and curious, so I assumed it was my mom. "Going to the bathroom?" I replied. I waited for a response but heard nothing. "Hello?" I asked again. Still no reply. When I came out, I asked my mom why she knocked on the door. She looked at me confused and said she hadn't left the couch. She suggested I might have heard the TV, but I knew the difference. I know my mom wasn't lying, and I'm certain it wasn't the TV. It was odd. The case of the cowboy hat. My neighbor and I loved playing with Barbies like most little girls. One day we were dressing up Ken, and I had a small cowboy hat sitting in front of me that I planned to put on him. I turned around to grab another piece of clothing, and when I went to grab the hat, it was gone. "Did you take the cowboy hat?" I asked my friend. She shook her head no. We searched all over for it, and I was getting annoyed when, out of nowhere, the hat fell from the ceiling and landed right in front of me. We were both stunned, staring at it in disbelief. Neither of us could explain how that happened. The makeup incident. Another time, my neighbor was spending the night, and we were playing with some kid makeup, small circular containers of pink eyeshadow, lip gloss, and other little cosmetics. While we were playing, we started hearing light scratching sounds on the wall, right next to where the makeup was sitting. The noise continued for a solid 10 minutes, and it spooked us both. When it finally stopped, we shrugged it off and went back to playing. About 5 minutes later, one of the containers of lip gloss flipped upright and rolled off the table. We both saw it happen, but by that point we were so used to weird things that we just said, "That was weird," and carried on. The end of the haunting, as I mentioned in my previous story, I eventually got fed up with all the strange activity and confronted the lady. I told her to leave me alone, and after that, the occurrences stopped entirely. Looking back, I think she was just a lonely old woman who was trying to watch over me and my friend, or perhaps even play with us since we were little girls. While it was unnerving at the time, I don't think she meant any harm. She was simply a presence that needed to be acknowledged, and once I spoke to her, she seemed to find peace. When you think of a cellar or an unfinished basement, you might picture one littered with old clutter, dirt sprinkling through cracks in the walls, and spiders crawling out of hiding. Or maybe you imagine a bare basement with just a single 60-watt bulb hanging from the ceiling by a string. It's easy to associate such basements with hauntings. But as my story proves, you don't need an old house or a creepy basement for the paranormal to make itself known. My story begins when my parents got divorced while I was in 5th grade. My mom moved into a brand new condo in a slick, modern subdivision in our small town. The houses were all model homes, freshly built, with no history to them. My mom was drawn to the idea of easier upkeep, and we quickly fell in love with the spacious home, even though it felt oddly cold, and there was a strange negativity hanging in the air. On the day we first toured the house, my mom and brother went to explore the backyard while I ventured into the basement. To my relief, it was finished, big, bright, and beautiful. I imagined all the ways I could make it my space. I turned on all the lights and sat down, letting my imagination run wild. Suddenly, I heard someone shouting my name from upstairs. Thinking it was my mom, I thumped up the stairs, leaving the lights on. But when I got upstairs, I saw my mom in the backyard, still talking to my brother and the realtor. Confused, I turned to head back upstairs when I remembered I'd left the basement lights on and the doors open to the bathroom and the storage room under the stairs. I went back down to turn them off, but to my horror, I found all the lights off and every door was shut. Terrified, I ran back upstairs, only to hear the basement door slam shut behind me. I ran outside crying, begging my mom not to buy the house. But she told me we had no choice and went ahead with the offer. We moved into the house, and from that day forward, I experienced negative paranormal activity. My friends would see apparitions and hear voices whenever they came over. Despite the cozy basement setup with couches, a big screen TV, and even a foosball table, no one wanted to go down there. Interestingly, only children seemed to notice these things, including my brother, who doesn't believe in ghosts but admitted seeing things he couldn't explain. While living in that house, I endured countless nightmares, heard footsteps chasing me up the stairs, and witnessed lights turning on and off by themselves. Doors would open and shut, random laughter echoed, and I often saw apparitions wandering through the living room. Conversations and whispers would sound outside my door, even when no one was there. One of the scariest nights I ever had involved my best friend, who is also a member of this site, music is life. She spent the night at my house, but we stayed in my room because she was terrified of the house. As we lay in bed talking, the room suddenly became freezing cold. The door opened on its own, and we heard giggling. I was used to this kind of activity by then, so I decided to challenge the spirit by shutting the door. The door opened again, this time harder. Each time I shut it, the spirit became more forceful, until it finally slammed the door into my face. I screamed in pain, and the door slammed shut. All night, the lights flickered on and off, and we saw the apparition of a man standing in different corners of my room. To this day, I wonder how many spirits are in that house and whether any of them were protecting me. I like to believe at least one good spirit was looking out for me in that eerie home. One night, my G-mama, grandma, and my mom decided to go out for a drink, leaving me in charge of the house. I was left to babysit 3 little kids. Nash, who is 5 and can see ghosts. Nate, who is 4 and is believed to see ghosts but doesn't talk much. And Christian, my 6-year-old little brother. We also had Shelby, our black lab, with us. My grandpa was out on cop duty, so it was just us in the house. Around 10 p.m., the kids started getting sleepy, so I sent them to bed. An hour later, I fell asleep too, confident they'd be fine. At 12:13 a.m., I woke up to the sound of kids running through the second living room. I assumed it was the little ones waking up for water, as they often did. I figured if they were really thirsty, they'd get a drink and go back to bed. So I shrugged it off and tried to fall back asleep. But then I heard the sound of running feet in the hallway again. Frustrated, I got up and went to check on them. All 3 were sound asleep. To be sure, I pinched my brother really hard. He woke up groggily and yelled at me. I knew they weren't faking because when they're awake, they'd laugh or giggle. Still convinced someone was up, I left my bedroom door open to keep an eye on the hallway. All the bedrooms faced the living room, so I'd easily catch whoever was running around. The sound of little feet running came again. I looked out eagerly, but no one was there. This time, fear began creeping in. Then, I heard heavy boots stomping in the bathroom that connects my bedroom to the living room. That's when I knew it wasn't the kids. Whoever or whatever it was had to weigh over 100 pounds. The toilet flushed by itself. I jumped out of bed and ran to the bathroom, but no one was there. With Shelby by my side, I locked the bathroom door, ensuring no one could enter except through my bedroom. Feeling a bit braver, I climbed back into bed. But before I could relax, the toilet flushed again. That's when fear truly set in. Even Shelby, my brave dog, was scared. She whimpered and ran to the living room, only to come back and leap onto the bed beside me. She stared intensely at something in the doorway. I was on the verge of screaming for it all to stop when, suddenly, everything went silent. The toilet stopped flushing, the sound of running feet ceased, and the heavy boots disappeared. I fell asleep with the TV on, only to wake up later to my mom's voice. I wanted to tell her what happened but decided to wait until morning. That morning, I had a strange dream. In it, I was being chased by a man with red eyes who looked like a Native American. Beneath my feet were the bodies of children and an old soldier. The red-eyed man wouldn't stop chasing me. "Wake up! It's time to go to town, Hannah," my little cousin said, waking me up. I told my G-mama about the dream. She revealed that there were Native American burial grounds in the backyard and that deaths had occurred on the property. Looking back, it was a terrifying experience. Does my dream connect to what happened that night? Were the children and soldier I saw tied to the sounds of running feet and heavy boots? I can't help but wonder if the running ghosts in the living room were the spirits of those children. Many of you know that my partner has faced incredible challenges recently. At one point, we feared we might lose her, but she continues to fight and thanks the Great Spirit every day, singing songs of gratitude as she faces each new dawn. Our journey together began more than 20 years ago. We met while working at a farm market. I worked in the fields, harvesting the crops, while she was in the store, selling our goods. She had a natural charisma that drew people in, but it was her honesty that kept them coming back. She was the type of person who would stop a sale if something didn't feel right. A cut of meat that didn't look fresh, for example. She couldn't bring herself to push through a sale she didn't believe in. She came from a world very different from mine. Her family was wealthy, and she had never lacked for anything. Yet, she had a generous heart and worked hard for what she gave to others. Her giving nature sometimes frustrated her parents, but she was never deterred from following her heart. Although the field workers and store workers were supposed to keep to their separate roles, she often broke that unspoken rule. She spent her breaks with us and sometimes joined us in the fields, her laughter brightening even the hardest days. It was clear she walked to the beat of her own drum. We quickly became friends, and over time, our bond grew deeper. When she met my family for the first time, it was she who took my arm and led me to our lodge, even though I hesitated out of shame. I knew the humble state of my family's home couldn't compare to the wealth she was used to, but she treated my family with warmth and respect, as if she'd known them for years. She saw past the squalor we lived in and only cared about the people. Our path wasn't an easy one. She met with our medicine man, shared her knowledge, and listened with open curiosity. He was impressed by her wisdom and spirit. When I finally decided to ask her father for her hand in marriage, it caused a stir in both families. They had seen the connection between us long before we acknowledged it ourselves, and the idea of her leaving her world for mine was met with resistance. I explained to her that, according to the ways, she would have to leave her family and live among mine for a year to prove the intent of her heart. Without hesitation, she agreed. We set her up in a small hunter's cabin on the edge of the land. It had no bathroom, no running water, and none of the comforts she was used to, but she accepted it with a smile. During that year, strange things happened around her. Lights would flicker and crackle from her fires, and voices could be heard even when she was alone. She ventured out daily, gathering herbs and medicines she couldn't buy, learning as she went. Her determination never wavered, and her smile never faded. The final step was a month in the lodge of the medicine man. As a woman, she was expected to assist with medical needs, and she proved herself in ways none of us had anticipated. Her knowledge and intuition were remarkable. She knew when to thank the Great Spirit, when to wait, and when to act. Her healing songs were powerful, and her strength amazed even the medicine man. At the end of her trial, she was asked a single question. Why did she rise every morning and do all that she did, knowing she would receive no reward? Her answer revealed her heart. She said, "When things get tough, the ancestors carry me." She spoke of being visited by the old ones in her times of greatest need, feeling their guidance when she could not ask for help. For her, earthly rewards held no importance. She believed in a greater purpose and said she would one day face the horseman and know if she had succeeded. The next April, we were married. During the ceremony, she received her path name. Though she humbly felt it didn't suit her, it was a testament to the respect and love she had earned. That night, the skies lit up with colors reminiscent of the northern lights, though we were far from the North Pole. The ceremonial fires sent sparks skyward, signaling the presence of the ancestors. Even the owls stood silent, as if in reverence. This may not sound like a traditional ghost story, but it is a deeply spiritual one. It's about how the spirits of the elders guided us and taught us through her, a woman who walks between realms, learning from the spirits and giving all she has while asking for nothing in return. She is my warrior, and I am forever grateful. I remember the first few years after moving into my new home with my mom and brother. It was the same house from Modern Home Haunting, and those years were filled with terrifying experiences that no one seemed to believe were real. While my family isn't particularly religious, I've always believed in another world. A world that seems to constantly try to communicate with me. One time, my mom even took me to the doctor because she thought I needed medication to calm myself down. She said I wasn't acting normal, though I've always been a bit of a stressed person. I continued splitting my time between my parents' houses, which gave me some relief from the constant haunting. One of the scariest experiences I ever had was almost being possessed. I suffered from terrible nightmares and blackouts, to the point where I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The spirits in the house had me questioning my sanity, and for a moment, I thought the only way to escape was through suicide. But I refused to give in. I knew I was stronger than the spirits tormenting me. Through it all, I had one companion ghost who stood by me, Ashes. Ashes came into my life when I was at my lowest. After my parents separated, I felt so alone that I stopped talking to anyone. One day, I simply spoke into the air, saying I needed someone to be there for me. That same day, I picked up a pen and started drawing on a pad. I drew a massive white wolf with black markings on one side of his fur, and somehow, I knew his name was Ashes. I learned he had died in a fire, a detail I found fascinating because I've always had a deep fear of fire, from stoves to bonfires, even fire on TV. Ashes became my constant companion, following me wherever I went and comforting me. He tried to protect me from the other spirits in my mom's house. But there was a time when the stronger spirits were able to block my connection with him. During that time, I felt hopeless, convinced that Ashes wasn't real and I was entirely alone. The overwhelming sadness in the house only made things worse, especially as my mom struggled with her own emotional well-being. At first, the hauntings seemed playful. Things would go missing, and I thought Ashes was just trying to lighten my mood. He had always been a noble jokester, after all. But the disappearing items became so frequent that my mom and brother grew frustrated and started blaming me. I thought Ashes would stop and apologize, but he didn't. Then I remembered the feeling I had when I first went into the basement while touring the house. It made me shiver even thinking about it. Maybe it wasn't Ashes causing the disturbances but the spirits in the basement. Soon, the activity grew stronger and more intimidating. I began to realize that not all spirits have good intentions. I learned the hard way that spirits can be deceiving, and if you're not careful, they can be downright dangerous. Ashes remained my protector, though, and our bond stayed strong despite everything. I'm grateful he was there for me during some of the hardest times of my life. Even now, I know I must remain cautious and never assume all spirit activity is harmless. During my time in the house, whispers and voices were a constant part of the haunting. Hearing voices outside my bedroom door became almost routine every night I was there. Sometimes, it sounded like 2 or 3 people were quietly talking right outside, as if trying not to wake me up. Strangely, I didn't feel threatened by these spirits, even though they often disturbed my sleep. Other times, the voices were louder and angrier. I'd hear shouting from over the balcony near my room and the living room. Occasionally, I'd even hear my name, which made me wonder if they were shouting directly at me. The frustrating part about the whispers was that I could rarely understand them. The only words I could ever clearly make out were when they mentioned my name. I was more patient with the gentle whispers outside my door, but when the voices were raised, or worse, when they entered my room, I became desperate to understand them, though I never could. On rare occasions, I heard the voices inside my room. Whenever that happened, I would immediately turn on the lights and the television to distract myself. This always worked, eventually frustrating the spirit enough to either move objects or leave altogether. But on those nights, I hardly got any sleep. A few nights ago, something strange happened. My cat, who usually cuddles up and purrs next to me, was lying close as usual while I read a book and watched a little TV. When I was ready for bed, I turned off my tall lamp on the right side of my bed. My overhead light had burned out, and we hadn't been able to replace it yet, so the lamp was my only source of light. I sleep on the left side of the bed and started drifting off when I heard Ash's voice. He climbed onto the right side of the bed, laying his big head on the pillow. In his deep, reassuring voice, he told me that I was safe and that he was there for me. He kept repeating it, occasionally licking my hand to comfort me. It felt strange but also soothing, so I pushed aside any lingering unease and tried to fall asleep. Then I heard a noise. I've always relied on my cat to help me sense spirits when I'm too scared to look myself. I watch her expressions to determine if a spirit is a threat. Usually, she's calm, turning her head slightly before laying it back down and continuing to purr. But this time, she went completely silent. She swallowed hard, her eyes locked on something, and then she jumped off the bed and ran out of the room. Ashes shifted closer to me, growling softly. "You'll be okay," he reassured me. Trusting him, I lay back down and closed my eyes, even though my heart was racing. Moments later, I heard a whisper. A man's voice, clear and loud enough to wake me. It was more of a talk whisper, and though I couldn't understand the words, I had a feeling I could if I concentrated hard enough. I stayed still, trying to shake it off, but my heart raced as I heard footsteps creaking closer on the left side of my bed. My side. Each time a step came closer, Ash's growl deepened. Then, the whisper returned, this time right next to me, louder and clearer. I felt hot breath on my neck and in my ear. That was when I panicked. Leaning over Ash's, I fumbled to turn on the lamp. The light clicked on, but then it flickered and went dark again. My fear surged as I felt something stroke my hair and gently brush my cheek before it finally left. I'm not sure if the spirit was there to harm me or not. Ash's didn't like it at first, growling protectively. But when the light turned off again, he shifted and seemed less alarmed, though still unsettled. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling of its presence long after it was gone. As some of you might know, I'm a curious teenager who loves exploring mysteries, especially the paranormal. Usually, I'm the one looking for the strange and unexplained, but this time, it seemed to find me when I least expected it. About a month ago, I stayed over at my friend Kayla's house. We were up late watching TV, and earlier, my mom had stopped by to do some laundry, leaving a load for me to finish. As usual, I waited until Kayla fell asleep on the living room floor. It was around 1:20 a.m. After watching her make funny faces in her sleep, which was amusing for a while, I decided to get up and finish the laundry. I turned on the kitchen light, which is right next to the laundry room and the garage door. When I opened the laundry door, I suddenly felt like someone was watching me. And trust me, when I feel that, it's never wrong. Thinking it was Kayla playing a prank, I jumped around the corner and yelled, "Ha! I found you!" But to my surprise, the room was empty. Just Kayla still sleeping on the floor. To be sure, I pinched her arm, and she groaned, clearly not faking. Feeling a bit uneasy, I went back to the laundry room. As I was moving the wet clothes into the dryer, I realized I'd forgotten the fabric softener. I walked back into the kitchen to grab a new one, and that's when the lights started flickering. Again, thinking it was Kayla, I jumped around the corner. No one was there. I sighed, turned the light switch off and back on, and went back to the laundry room. The lights flickered again. This time I decided to ignore it. But whatever or whoever it was clearly didn't like being ignored, because the lights turned off completely, leaving the house in darkness. Trying to reassure myself, I called out, "Stop it! That's not funny." I sighed again, finished starting the dryer, and headed back to the couch. For good measure, I gave Kayla another pinch to make sure it wasn't her. She just rolled over and groaned again. About 5 minutes later, I felt that same intense sensation of being watched. I looked around but saw no one. It was so unsettling that I pulled the blanket over my head, hoping it would go away. For context, it takes something really disturbing to make a 14-year-old hide under the blankets. Eventually, I peeked out, scanning the room. That's when I noticed something that made my heart race. The Jesus lamps in the room were flickering. Terrified, I jumped off the couch and huddled on the floor next to Kayla. Even though I was scared, I stayed by her side, hoping the feeling of those piercing eyes would leave. I ended up staying awake until 6 a.m., waiting for the unsettling sensation to fade. The next night, something even stranger happened. Kayla was in the bathroom brushing her teeth while I was in the living room watching America's Funniest Home Videos. Suddenly, she ran out of the bathroom screaming, startling me so much that I dropped my popcorn. I yelled, half laughing, "What's wrong?" She ran to the couch, looking frantic, and said she'd seen a black figure outside the bathroom door. I nodded, trying to stay calm, but she yelled at me for not taking her seriously. The truth is, I did believe her. I'm just not great at showing it. I told her, "It's okay. I believe you. It's just surprising that you're only now realizing there's something in your house." What I was really thinking was that it might not be her house at all. It could have been the spirit that follows me. Her name is Samantha. After about an hour, Kayla finally relaxed, and we finished watching the rest of the show. Now, I can't help but wonder, were the flickering lights truly paranormal activity, or just an electrical issue? And was the black figure Kayla saw a ghost haunting her home? Or was it Samantha, the spirit that's been attached to me? Oh. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Oh. I fell head over heels in love during the summer of 1985. That was the year I was finally allowed to watch the movie Somewhere in Time, which had been released 5 years earlier. At the time, it was considered a bit racy for someone as young as I was. But from the moment I saw the Grand Hotel, I was captivated. It made my heart sing. I watched the movie every chance I got and felt like I knew every room in that hotel by heart. I was sure I could navigate the entire building and its grounds without a map. I pored over brochures, studied encyclopedias. Remember those? And even sketched the hotel as best as I could. 2 years later, my father surprised our family with a trip to Mackinac Island. Words can't capture the thrill I felt as the island came into view from the ferry. My excitement bubbled over, and I couldn't stop talking to everyone on board, sharing facts about the island and the Grand Hotel. Much to my parents' embarrassment, I even chatted with strangers who looked more interested in the island's tourist shops and car-free streets than its storied history. As our carriage, with its swaying tassels, pulled up to the hotel grounds, I felt like my heart might burst. The grounds were immaculate, the porch gleamed in the sun, the flowers were vibrant, and the doorman looked like an angel. For an entire week, I explored the hotel, the gardens, and the town. It was everything I had dreamed of and more. During one of my wanderings, I found a hidden path leading down to the water. If I leaned just right, I could see the hotel through the trees. That little spot became my sanctuary, a place where I could listen to the sounds of nature undisturbed. But I wasn't alone. A boy about my age often sat nearby, staring out over the lake. He would occasionally glance in my direction, but like me, he seemed lost in thought, captivated by the serene beauty of the lake. On our last day, I went down to the lake one final time. Though I hadn't spoken to the boy all week, I felt compelled to say goodbye and let him know he'd have the spot to himself again. I awkwardly explained my family was leaving. He didn't reply, but his sad expression made me imagine that he might miss sharing this secret place with me. I couldn't help but regret not talking to him sooner. Maybe we could have explored the island together. As I walked back to the hotel, I stopped at the mission church to reflect and say a few words. Inside, I met a man and asked if he knew the boy. With only about 500 year-round residents on the island, I assumed he might. But to my surprise, he didn't. The ferry ride back to the mainland was bittersweet. I stood at the back of the boat, watching the hotel grow smaller until it disappeared from view. Later, I shared my experiences with some of the ferry workers, who kindly humored my enthusiasm for the island. But when I mentioned the boy, their expressions changed. One of them, Eric Lightfeather, asked where I had seen him. When I described the spot, he nodded solemnly. Eric explained that years earlier, a father and his young son had taken a snowmobile ride to the island during a harsh winter. Tragically, they hit thin ice and both fell through. The father's body wasn't recovered until the spring thaw, but the boy had managed to crawl to shore, where he was later found frozen on the banks of Lake Huron, near the spot I'd seen him. This revelation stayed with me, adding an unearthly layer to my memories of the trip. Years later, I also learned that the Grand Hotel wasn't the one used in Somewhere in Time. While the island featured in the film, the actual hotel was the Hotel del Coronado in California. Once I knew that, I made it my goal to visit that hotel too. Mackinac Island holds a sacred place in the traditions of its earliest inhabitants, the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe tribes, who believe it to be home to the Great Spirit. For me, it will always remain a place of magic, wonder, and memories that feel almost otherworldly. A few months ago, in June or July, my grandparents took a short vacation to Florida. While they were gone, my mom and brothers were house-sitting. I visit my grandma's house every other Friday to spend the night with my mom. My parents divorced 2 years ago, and this is where my mom and I meet. Before I get into what happened, let me give you an idea of the house layout. My grandparents live out in the countryside, surrounded by woods and swamp. They have neighbors across the street and maybe 6 more down the 2-mile road, but it feels pretty isolated. When you first walk into the house, you're greeted by a small upstairs area with a couch and coat hangers. If you go left, there's a short hallway. On the left side of the hallway is my grandpa's man cave, and directly across from it is a bathroom. Next to that bathroom is my mom's old bedroom from when she lived there, and at the end of the hall is a guest room. If you don't turn left when entering, straight ahead is the dining table with a small kitchen beside it. Beyond the kitchen is the master bedroom, and just before the master bedroom there's a door that leads outside. If you turn right, you'll find an L-shaped staircase that goes down to the basement, which has a living room and some other spaces, but it's not really relevant to this story. Now to the interesting part. That evening, I was feeling bored, so I grabbed my camera and started snapping random photos. I love photography. As I stood near the front door, I heard footsteps coming from my mom's room into the kitchen. I knew my mom was in her room, but I heard the fridge open and assumed she was grabbing something to drink. Then, I heard the footsteps again, this time heading toward the stairs. My bag was downstairs, and since my brother's friends were over, I was planning to sleep in the guest room. I thought I'd catch my mom before she went downstairs and ask her to grab my bag. I rushed to the stairs and peeked my head around the edge, but no one was there. Confused, I walked quickly to my mom's room and saw her sitting at her computer, completely engrossed in whatever she was doing. I excitedly told her what I'd heard, but she confirmed she hadn't left her room. She suggested I check if one of my brothers was downstairs. I went to look, but one of them was fast asleep, and the other had gone out to grab food. I've always believed in spirits and ghosts, so hearing those footsteps was exciting to me. What's even more interesting is that this happened while my grandparents weren't home. Nothing much ever seems to happen when they're there, but when they're away, it's a different story. The history of the land makes it even more intriguing. The property was once a peppermint farm, and my brother told me that 2 horses got stuck in the swamp nearby and died. I asked my grandma if this was true, and while she couldn't confirm it, she said it was possible. This experience is one I'll never forget, and it makes me wonder what else might be lingering on that property. I grew up in a small town south of Detroit, where most people in my family worked in factories, machine shops, or assembly plants. Around here, it's not uncommon to hear stories about people getting killed or seriously injured on the job. As my dad used to say, things at the plants were a lot different before those P*********s at OSHA came in and changed everything. After hearing some of the stories myself, I never understood why he thought OSHA was such a bad thing. I wasn't a factory worker, though. I worked as a humble security guard at one of these places. The plant I was assigned to had a long history. It used to be a foundry back in the 1950s before it was shut down and converted into a warehouse in the 1980s. For those who don't know, a foundry is a factory where steel gets cast into different forms. I started working there in 2006, hired by a contracted security company for the midnight shift. Some of the older employees like to tell stories about the place, claiming it was built on top of a county-owned graveyard. I never confirmed this, and it seemed more like an old-timer trying to spook the younger guys. Still, there was one fact that was undeniably eerie. The plant was the first factory in the country where someone was killed by an automated machine. One part of the job involved doing patrol rounds through the basement. My first time down there, it was exactly what you'd expect. Dirty, dusty, full of old junk and spare parts, and dimly lit. The air felt heavy, and there was little to no cell phone signal. Even our handheld radios struggled to get reception. The basement had motion-activated lights, which only stayed on for about 20 minutes. They'd turn on when you got within 7 or 8 feet of them, which was usually fine, except for one area. For whatever reason, the lights in this section never worked. You had to walk straight through it as part of the round, so I always carried a flashlight. One summer night in 2006, I was doing my usual rounds. When I got to the dark area, I switched on my flashlight and kept moving. About 12 feet in front of me, I saw the shadowy outline of a man walk out from the darkness, pass behind a support column, and vanish. It startled me, but I told myself it was probably someone messing with me and kept going. The next night, I was back in the basement, but something felt off. The air felt strange, almost charged, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. When I got to the same area where I'd seen the shadow, I paused, but this time there was no shadow man. I continued into another part of the basement, a long, dark hallway. As I stood there, staring into the darkness, the lights at the far end of the hall began turning on, one by one, getting closer. I gripped my flashlight, ready to swing at whatever was coming my way, but all I felt was a cold breeze pass by. What made it even stranger was that my coworkers were having similar experiences. They reported seeing shadows, feeling gusts of cold air in places that shouldn't have had any airflow, and hearing unexplained noises. I ended up working there longer than I should have, and during that time I saw the shadow man several more times. The cold breezes became almost a regular occurrence. Even though I've moved on to other jobs, I still think about those nights. Were the things I saw just tricks of the light? Or were they the spirits of people who met their end in that factory, still on the job long after their time? I have plenty more creepy stories from that place and other experiences I've had. But the shadow man and those cold breezes are the ones that still linger in my mind. In the fall of 2007, I decided it was time to take my interest in the paranormal to the next level. After years of research, I wanted to get out into the field and do some hands-on investigating. I connected with a local paranormal group that graciously offered me a trial run. We met at a restaurant to discuss the night's plan, investigating a local cemetery known for its reportedly high paranormal activity. The cemetery had a fascinating, if eerie, history. According to legend, it was the final resting place of a witch who had been hanged around 1870, no doubt by angry townsfolk armed with pitchforks and torches. The family that had owned the land was also buried there, adding to its lore. By this point, I had already dabbled in recording EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, though with little success, and I had a digital camcorder that I was still getting the hang of. Excited for the night ahead, I joined the group as we headed out after dark to locate the cemetery. When we finally arrived, the atmosphere was exactly what you'd expect: dark, quiet, and heavy with anticipation. We stayed close together as we explored. But the night took an unexpected turn when we stumbled upon something none of us had anticipated. A large pro-life truck parked at the back of the cemetery, adorned with graphic images of aborted fetuses and the name Truth Truck USA. We were stunned. First, we wondered, why on earth is a truck like this parked in the middle of a cemetery? Second, we couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. We came looking for ghosts and found this instead. As we started to walk away from the truck, things got even stranger. A man in dark blue mechanic's coveralls appeared, walking toward the truck. Without saying a word, he climbed in, disappearing into the camper on the back. The whole scene was unsettling, like something out of a horror movie. It reminded me of Michael Myers, and we all agreed it was time to leave. We regrouped in the restaurant parking lot where we'd started, said our goodbyes, and called it a night. The investigation itself had lasted about 2 hours, and I had roughly 90 minutes of video footage and 30 minutes of audio recordings to review the next day. While I didn't capture anything noteworthy on the EVP, the video was a different story. About 20 minutes into the footage, I was holding my camera and following two people walking about 15 feet ahead of me. As I reviewed the video, I noticed something strange in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. A shadowy figure darted out from behind a headstone, ran up behind one of the people in front of me, and then vanished. The figure wasn't very tall, maybe 2 to 2.5 feet at most, and for some reason it struck me as the shadow of a little girl. The movement was clear, deliberate, and unmistakable. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I never returned to that cemetery, and over time, I lost contact with the group I had joined that night. But I've shown the video to several people over the years, and everyone who's seen it agrees. There's something unsettling about that shadow. It's there plain as day, running from behind the headstone, and every single person who's watched it gets a little creeped out. I can't say for certain what I captured on camera that night, but it's a moment that sticks with me. Whether it was a trick of the light or something truly paranormal, it left an impression I won't soon forget. Last year, I woke up early to get ready for school. I was in a good mood, fully awake, and ready to start the day. I went downstairs to grab breakfast, and as I stood in front of the fridge, something unusual happened. My house has a small hallway that connects the living room and the kitchen. From where I stood, I could see the front door in the distance. Suddenly, I felt an urge to look toward the door. As I did, I saw a girl who looked about 15 years old. She had long black hair, pale white skin, a white summer dress, and bare feet. She ran from the direction of the basement, or so I assume, since I only caught her in the opening to the kitchen. She moved quickly through the mini hallway toward the front door, but she didn't open it or go through it. She simply vanished when I looked closer. I didn't mention it to anyone at first, but a few weeks ago, while watching Paranormal Witness with my mom, I told her about it. To my surprise, she said she's seen the same girl before. Sometimes, while sitting on the couch near the stairs, she notices the girl peeking from the top of the staircase. The only deaths we know about in connection to this area are a paperboy and 2 brothers, but none occurred in this townhouse. The blue-skinned creature. This wasn't my first strange encounter. Back in 3rd grade, at our old house, I woke up one morning needing to use the bathroom. I wasn't expecting anything unusual to happen. Like always, I left the bathroom door open. It had a habit of closing on its own in that house. As I sat there, I glanced toward the toy room, technically a guest room, but no one else lived with us then. That's when I saw it. A creature emerged from the room, walking or maybe hovering. It had blue skin and wore a long red dress. Its fingernails were long and yellow, and its back was hunched. Its face was flat and featureless. No eyes, mouth, or nose. Just smooth blue skin. Wisps of black hair stuck out from its head. It paused briefly, then hovered into the hallway. I sat there, frozen, trying to memorize its details so I could describe it to my mom later. The girl in the air vent in 4th grade, I learned about a story that kids passed around. Something about a girl who had died in the air vents at school. At the time, I didn't pay much attention to it. One day, I went to the girls' bathroom and decided to use the first stall, which no one ever seemed to use. I thought it was odd that people avoided it and wanted to see for myself. While sitting there, I felt a strange compulsion to look up. Above me was an air vent, and peeking out of it was a child's head. Her black hair looked wet, maybe bloody, and her skin was pale, cut, and dehydrated, like a corpse left for months. She looked at least 3 months dead. Terrified, I ran out of the stall, barely pulling my pants up. Months later, my friend Haley showed me a video she'd taken at school at 3 a.m. The footage showed the lights in the girls' bathroom were on, and someone was walking around inside. At first, I thought it was just the janitor. But why would a janitor be cleaning an elementary school bathroom at 3 a.m.? Communicating with spirits a few days ago, my friend Emma and I decided to try talking to the spirits in my house. We sat together and asked questions. To our surprise, we got an answer. In a male voice, we heard, "I'm alive." We laughed nervously. Emma called out, "If you were alive, you'd actually talk to us." But the voice didn't say anything else after that. The shadow by the TV 4 weeks ago, I went to bed as usual. My cat, Jake, was lying at the end of the bed, and I turned off all the lights. My sensitive eyes let me see fairly well in the dark, so I looked around the room before settling in. As I closed my eyes, I heard a whisper, my name. I opened my eyes and saw a tall, dark shadow figure standing near my TV. It didn't move, just stood there silently. Panicked, I jumped out of bed and turned on the lights. The figure was gone, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the lights off again. That night, I kept my TV on for comfort. In the early 90s, my parents bought an empty lot on one of the Great Lakes. Over several years, we gradually built a house there. We did most of the work ourselves, except for the basement, the framework, and the furnace installation. I can confidently say that no one has ever died in the house itself, but the land is another story. The area has a notable history. According to a nearby historical marker, there was a Native American conflict that wiped out a small tribe. Given this, it wouldn't surprise me if someone had died on the property. For the first year or so, everything was peaceful. Even my bedroom, despite its unfinished ceiling and lack of blinds that woke me up earlier than I liked, was quiet. But that didn't last. Slowly, I began feeling uncomfortable in my room. At first, it was minor. I kept the door open and struggled to fall asleep. Over time, it escalated to the point where, after sunset, I constantly felt like I was being watched from the open door. The walking and the deal some events are more memorable than others. For example, after I started sleeping in my dad's room when he wasn't there, I began hearing footsteps in the hallway, on the stairs, and all over the first floor. One night, the noise was so persistent it kept me awake. Frustrated, I told it, "If you just quiet down, I'll leave tomorrow." Instantly, the noise stopped. It was so abrupt that if it had been a person, they would have had to freeze in place for the rest of the night. The next morning, I called my parents to tell them I was heading home. However, my dad insisted I stay a few more days to mow the lawn before leaving. He wouldn't budge, and when he took the tone with me, I knew the argument was over. That night, the footsteps returned with a vengeance. They stomped down the hallway, ran up and down the stairs, and stayed exclusively on the second floor. All the while, I could hear laughter, mocking and playful. It felt like the ghost was furious I hadn't kept my end of the bargain and wasn't willing to accept that my dad had forced me to stay. The presence of Boots throughout all this, my dog Boots, a loyal companion, was unbothered by the ghost. She could spend all day in the room and seemed completely at ease, as if the ghost had no issue with her. A year after Boots passed away from a mysterious condition that left her legs weak, I had an unforgettable experience. That night began like most others. I felt the ghost staring at me from the room, intensifying its focus to the point where I contemplated leaving the house. Suddenly, I felt Boots beside me. I couldn't see her, but her presence was undeniable. Out of habit, I reached out to pet her before realizing what was happening. The moment I acknowledged her presence, I felt the ghost upstairs recoil as if she'd been bitten, quickly retreated into the room and didn't bother me for the rest of the night. Later, when I went to bed, I patted the spot where Boots used to sleep. To my astonishment, the bed squeaked as if she had just jumped onto it. The peekaboo girl. Another notable encounter happened while I was in the dining area of the front room. I felt something peeking at me over the railing of the second floor. When I looked up, I saw a presence slink back behind the wall. I returned to my game of solitaire, but soon it peeked out again. This happened several times before I got a mental image of what was going on. A young girl, no older than 10, playing a game of peekaboo with me. Her intent wasn't to scare me. She was just being playful. Once I realized this, I chuckled and told her she was welcome to keep playing. For a few minutes, we continued the game until she eventually faded away. Before she left, I told her she could come back anytime, but she hasn't returned since. I grew up in Augusta, Michigan, a small, quiet town about 20 minutes from Kalamazoo. The house I lived in on Canal Street was the first building ever constructed in the town, dating back to the late 1800s or early 1900s. It had a lot of history. Originally built as Augusta's library, the house later became a family home after the passing of General George Armstrong Custer, for whom the nearby Fort Custer military base was named. Eventually, it became our home. Over the years, it had seen countless faces, and its walls carried a sense of history that you could almost feel. The house was full of secrets, trapdoors and underground tunnels that led to the basement, and one tunnel that appeared to lead out of the house but had been sealed off. My brother's room, which later became mine, seemed to be the center of the house's activity. It was located at the back of the house and wasn't part of an extension that had been added by an Amish family before we moved in. Interestingly, no activity ever occurred in the newer part of the house. The first incident, I was about 9 or 10 years old when I had my first strange experience. One night, while I was sleeping in my room, I heard creaking in the hallway, distinctive footsteps. The sound stopped, and after a minute, I got up to check, but there was no one there. My brother was sound asleep in his room down the hall. Years later, when I moved into that room, the activity seemed to escalate. I frequently heard creaking in the hallway and unexplained noises from other parts of the house. Some were loud, others soft, but we often brushed them off as old plumbing or the wind. The closet door incident one night stands out vividly in my memory. My room had a closet that housed one of the trapdoors I mentioned earlier. That night, the closet door swung open. It wasn't a dramatic movement, just an inch or two, but it was enough to know it wasn't caused by the wind or a change in air pressure. For a brief moment, the room felt noticeably colder. At the time, I was too young to understand that this could be a sign of a paranormal presence, but the uneasiness I felt was undeniable. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night, and after that, I became so uncomfortable in the room that I asked my parents to move me to the room next to theirs. Even after I left the room, the strange activity continued. The closet door would always be wide open, no matter how many times we tried to close it. We'd shut it as far as it would go, only to find it open again the next day. Eventually, we gave up and left it open until my dad decided to install a new handle. After that, the door stayed shut, though we still occasionally heard faint tapping sounds coming from inside, like someone gently tapping their fingernail against the wood. Moving Oni haven't been back to the house in a while. It holds so many memories, but it's no longer in the family. After my parents passed away, my brother and I moved back in, hoping to hold on to the place we grew up in. Unfortunately, disagreements and financial strain forced us to let it go. As of January 2012, the house is in possession of the bank and is up for sale. The house was always more than just a home. It was a piece of history, filled with secrets and echoes of the past. Though I've moved on, the experiences I had there will stay with me forever. This happened when I was in high school. My dad, always looking for new ways for our family to bond, decided we should start camping during the summers on lakes where we could fish and take out a boat. To make it happen, he bought a fifth-wheel camper. We got it for a good price because it had been converted from a part camping, part horse trailer. You could clearly tell where the original camping trailer ended. There were a couple of steps leading down into the living room, and you could still faintly see where the hinges for the horse ramp used to be. The 2 or 3 times we used the camper for actual camping went great. We all enjoyed it, but as with many of Dad's hobbies, his interest faded quickly. He ended up selling it to help buy the land where our cabin now sits. But before he sold it, while the camper was still parked on our property, something strange happened. At first, I thought it would be fun to hang out in the camper. I even planned to sleep out there on warm nights just for a change of scenery. However, the camper didn't feel the same as it had when we were camping. Something about being in it at home felt off. I brushed it off as me overthinking things. One day, I was outside waiting for the horse trough to fill with water. The horses had knocked it over the night before, so I had several gallons to wait for. As I walked past the camper, I suddenly heard 2 girls talking. "He wouldn't do that, he's too nice," said one voice, dismissing whatever the other had just said. "I know, but he did," the second voice replied insistently. The voices caught me off guard. For some reason, my immediate thought was that they were talking about me. What they could have been referring to, I had no idea. And why I felt that way, I can't explain, it was just an instinct. I stood there for a moment, listening to see if the conversation would continue, but it didn't. Eventually, I shrugged it off and went about my day. Over the next month, I didn't hear the voices again and assumed whatever strange energy I'd encountered in the trailer was gone. Then, one cold morning while I was waiting for the school bus, something else happened. The wind was biting, and I considered going into the camper to shield myself from it. I decided against it, thinking it wouldn't be much warmer anyway, and continued to wait by the roadside. A few minutes later, I had a strange feeling, like someone was watching me. I turned around to look at the camper and saw a man pushing back the curtains. He glanced out for a split second and then vanished. Startled me, but I didn't go inside to investigate. Looking back now, I wish I had. The hauntings didn't seem malicious. At worst, they were gossiping about me, and at best, they were simply carrying on a private conversation that I happened to overhear. Still, I wasn't as comfortable with paranormal experiences back then as I am now, so I stayed outside and let it be. To this day, I wonder about those voices and the man in the camper. I'll never know who or what they were, but I can't help but think there was more to that trailer than we realized. When this experience first happened, I felt a mix of annoyance and fear. But now, looking back, I wonder if it was truly poltergeist activity or the work of a helpful spirit. Here's what happened